Phones are silent, therefore I will miss phone calls first.
I don't know if there's a way to make the screen bigger, not have all the. There we go, thank you. Okay, welcome everyone. It is Monday, August 28th, 2023. We do have our special meeting this morning. I do want to let the record reflect that we have for the commissioners, Commissioner Waldrop, I think we're expecting at any moment, so we will we will see. I don't think she's planning on missing, so she will be here soon, but the other 4 commissioners are present. And then also on the special meeting notice, it did go out that it was Tuesday, August 28th. On the actual notice itself, the email stated it was Monday the 28th. That was just a clerical error, so I just wanted to reflect that for the record. So with that, with the special meeting this morning, is to discuss all things fire as well as a couple additional items. So we're going to get started with Sheriff John Holmes.
Thank you for inviting me here. Just to give you all a couple of updates. Largely in both fires, you're starting to see a drawdown of fire personnel at both fire scenes, which is anticipated. The state teams will start to right size, as they put it, which means good news is a lot of the hot spots, they're dealing with them, they're out, and the threat of the fires reemerging reduces every day. So the good news is that as they recede, the threat is lower. However, they start to transfer communication to the public, those responsibilities more over to us, the Department of Emergency Management. And again, as we've kind of spoken to in both of the community meetings that we've held in the last 4 days okay, now we're transferring and transitioning into the recovery phase of this disaster, again, which will become a little more incumbent upon us at the county level to make sure we're getting our citizens informed on how to connect to state services, how to connect to federal services should we become eligible for some of those going forward. I will say, and for the commissioners who were up in Riverside yesterday, thank you for coming up. But I did commit to the citizens up there that we will do our level best to provide really excellent service to them, getting them connected to the services they need. I will say to the community to the west, the city of Medical Lake is doing a really, really good job advocating for their citizens, and we need to do the same for the citizens up in Riverside and for the folks who live outside the city of Medical Lake. So with that being said, we're having another community meeting with the folks up in Riverside tomorrow night, 6 o'clock at the high school. So please, and that's a meeting where the IMT team will be kind of taking a back seat to the sheriff's office, the Department of Emergency Management in Spokane County. Again, we will have state representatives from DEM there. We're, again, trying to connect people with all the information they need to help in the recovery. To give you some idea, between the 2 scenes, between the 2 disaster areas, we have lost a little north of 400 primary structures. That's a lot. And so we're going to have to see how we can help those folks. And I think there's a huge role for the county commissioners moving forward. Chandra will talk a little bit about that here in a minute. But we need to see what we can do to help our folks with, how do they clear debris once they get the authorization to move it. They've lost everything, and do we have to charge them $2,000 to dispose of the burned wreckage of their homes, or is there something the county can do, or there resources the state can bring to bear to help these folks clean up their properties, move on? When we start talking about building permitting processes and things like that going forward, I think there's a lot that the county can do or help affect going forward. So is there any questions? I will tell you that right now we're running, if we can staff them and find people to actually answer their phone, we're staffing 8 overtime shifts a day. 16 full shifts a day on overtime, and we'll probably keep that up through tomorrow night. I fully anticipate the evacuation levels to reduce again to, if not to no evacuation levels at all in both of those fire scenes by tomorrow night. And then we'll look at transitioning again into recovery and not so much security. And there's so much a security force out there, and return kind of maybe to normal staffing levels from there. So, you got any questions for me about that stuff?
So one question, and Commissioner French, you might be able to answer, that came up last night and John spoke to is, on permitting properties, to get building again. But with the new energy code standards, are they grandfathered in or are they not?
They are not. And Madam Chair, I am so glad you asked that question, because I have a resolution today to introduce to the board that will cover that, because the new building code comes into effect October 1. And these folks are not grandfathered in unless they can be vested. And so I've laid out a process, and I've discussed it with Scott Chesney, and he agrees with it, similar to what we did with the Hearst decision when we were dealing with water rights and access. We set up a process to where people could be vested in the current code. And so this resolution I was going to introduce this morning was to set up a process to where a homeowner could submit an application for the building department and a sketch, a freehand sketch, just something that shows what they want to be able to build, to the building department, and that application would be considered from our standpoint as vesting into the current code, so that when October 1 happens, they are not impacted by a new code that can add literally $30,000 to $35,000 to the construction cost of a new home. And so this will not only vest them in the current code, but it'll also give him 1 year to get the rest of the engineering, the architectural drawings and all that kind of stuff submitted to the building department so that it can go ahead and issue a permit. But what it does is it preserves the current code and avoids the new code, which comes into effect October 1. The code that's going to be introduced on October 1 has already been ruled invalid down in California by a U.S. District Court down there, but the state is still moving forward with its agenda. I also know that the code is going to be tied up in litigation. So to avoid all of that for all of these homeowners, let's create a clear path to be able to allow them to move forward under the current conditions, under the current code, which everybody knows, and then get invested into this code so that they don't have to incur, one, that expense, but also the timetable. The timetable is working against them. They got, 32 days to get engineering drawings and everything into a normal process. That ain't gonna happen. A lot of the state and federal agencies aren't gonna have their work done in 30 days, much less give direction to a property owner. So I was gonna introduce this morning and provide by board resolution that we will adjust our permitting process to allow for a freehand sketch and a $25 application. Basically, it just registers them into the process so that they can then move forward without having to worry about a new code that's going to dramatically impact the cost of their house. So.
Thank you. I think we may have to take that up tomorrow because
Okay.
we don't have miscellaneous, and since that's board action
Okay.
on our special meeting notice. So I was just looking through that would be,
So this is my attempt not to be an attorney. So I will distribute this for you guys to peruse. If you want to add to it, great. If you want to subtract from it, let's talk. But
I'd be happy to make sure we do it
yes,
by
we can.
tomorrow.
Yeah, we can do it as a by leave tomorrow. I'm
Because
happy
Mr.
to do
Anderson, I
that.
just want to double check, because we don't have miscellaneous on today's.
That seems safe, and I would certainly appreciate a day to make
Okay.
sure that there aren't any legal tweaks that need to be made before the board.
I know you guys do what you do. And this is very rude. I mean, quite honestly, I've spent the weekend working with various different people. We reduced this to writing this morning, so I'm sure that it's not perfect. I don't mean it to be perfect. I mean it to be a starting point because time is running out on us. So, but that's the goal and the intent, is to be able to provide some direction to these people, because otherwise, I mean, well, you and,
And we definitely heard that last night.
yeah,
That
yeah.
was, people came up to me after, and that was definitely one of the issues, and one of the fire commissioners was really talking about it. And I think if we can do this, that'd be great.
Yep.
So happy to take it up by leave tomorrow, because I
Okay.
don't want to get in trouble. Like, I was just looking when you said that, I'm like, we don't have miscellaneous here.
Well,
So-
and so, my request would be, if we can take this up expeditiously tomorrow would be great. We could also then do a press conference and let people know that we've changed the process so that it allows them more time. Because, what I heard last week was, oh dear God, how do I put all this stuff together in the time that I have left, because time is running against me. So hopefully this will give some relief to some folks and some comfort that they don't have to, try and comply with an arbitrary date.
Yes, no, and I think having Red Cross here and
Yeah.
we can make sure DNR is also, who else is doing the assessments?
So it's the state.
The state, so.
And I think that's something that once it's enacted, we can make sure that information is front and center at the
Yeah.
Disaster Assistance Center. And as we transfer into other types of things, I mean, I think anything you all can do to lessen the impact, these folks have been victimized once. I think the reality of it is even the folks who are insured, unless they had redone their insurance policy in the last couple of years, are likely underinsured for what happened to their homes, and we need to save them as much money as possible so they can actually rebuild them. I worry about the number of people who aren't going to be able to. The people with the $3 million homes, they're going to be able to rebuild. The people, who are in single wides and things like that, even if they're insured, it's going to be tough on them. So we need to help them however we can.
Well, and that's one of the reasons why I was, even in the resolution, just said it's a $25 fee. It's basically the cost to register is all it is. But by doing that and tying it to the application, I think that qualifies to get invested, similar to what we did with Hearst. Yeah.
I think the other thing to keep in mind, really pushing this information out, because,
Yes.
when you think of Hearst, with how publicized that was, everybody knew about the issues of domestic wells and all of that, and the number of people that would call me, that called me after that time had passed, and they say, well, I just called building and planning, and they told me I can't drill a well, and it's just, and somehow people missed that. Even how front and center that issue was at that point in time in 2016. Push this out every way we can. So.
Well, and with Hearst, we actually operated the building department on a Saturday. We extended the hours in the evenings because if people had to work, they couldn't come down here, but maybe we can do it online. And so I'll leave that up to the gurus to be able to figure that out. It would be great if you could just go online, enter your name and address, freehand sketch, $29, and you're golden for a full year. Take it up until October 1. And then I also provided that if somebody is delayed because of situations outside their control, whatever that might be, and I don't have any idea, that the building official can, at his discretion or her discretion, extend the time period. So that I don't want to create an artificial deadline that is arbitrary. Let's just help these people get reestablished. So that's the goal.
Very good. Well, this will give Mr. Anderson a day to take a look quick.
Just
Just
stamp it, it'll be fine.
Just initial thoughts, like how the building department will know if this individual was a victim of the fire. Maybe a little more detail about where we are legally with the building code appeals and lawsuits, because I don't know. You say that it might not even become effective if it's still in the courts, or is it not?
No, the state is moving forward to implement it on October 1. Now, then it gets, as I understand it, there's two lawsuits that one I think has already been filed. There's another one that's getting ready to be filed. And then there's also going to be a federal challenge. In the state of California, they tried to eliminate natural gas, and the US District Court, I think it wasn't the ninth, it was a different one, said states did not have the right to interfere with a national energy policy. And the use of natural gas is national energy policy. And so it ruled that their efforts to eliminate natural gas were invalid and struck it. Now, the State Building Code Council knew that, has chosen to ignore that because they didn't make any changes. And they will probably likewise be struck. But
So I just think we have to be mindful that, are we arguing that there's some legal issues, which is why we want to do it? Because that's what a lot of this, so I just think we'll need to talk more about it tomorrow. Like, are we doing this because we want to give victims another year, to be able to bring in their drawings? Or are we really concerned that the code will actually be thrown out?
right now,
We should probably be clear in our reason of why we're going to move forward
well,
with
there's
the
multiple
delay.
reasons. One, there's no clear path forward for them right now. Two, there's a time window that's artificial that they might not be able to meet because of other agencies. So all we've got is obstacles in front of these folks. And I'm trying to remove one of the obstacles, which
Right.
is get a building permit, or at least get vested in the current code. So,
So
what the reasons are, shoot, if I got creative, I could probably throw more reasons at it than that.
well, and I guess I haven't looked at it yet, but I mean,
That's right.
it really has nothing to do with what
Right,
is going to
that's my
happen in the future.
point.
It is about making sure they're vested
Make sure they're vested today.
today
That's it.
based on the building codes that they had in place,
Absolutely. Yes.
have in place today.
Yep.
That is going to make it, keep them in the manner that they were accustomed to.
Yes.
I mean, I think that's what I was hearing last night.
Yep.
Was that a lot of them had natural gas appliances and all of those, and they wanted to still keep those natural gas appliances
Yeah.
and didn't want to have to convert over to electric.
That's right.
And so that was concerns of people already who've lost everything. So it's, so I guess I would want to make sure that we're just stating the facts that this is just keeping them where they're at today.
Yeah.
If they get themselves vested.
Yeah, in fact, I tied it to the 2018 building code because that's what's in place today. And the code that'll be adopted and implemented on October 1 is the 2021 code and stuff. So, tried to be as specific as I could with regard to which codes, but feel free to add or subtract or whatever you want to do. But the goal is to keep them whole.
Okay,
Okay, so just, good morning, everybody.
good morning, Gianna.
Just some updates before I get to kind of the new information. Our Disaster Assistance Center, our DAC at Spokane Falls Community College has been open every day since Friday. It opened at noon on Friday. It was open 10 to 6 both Saturday and Sunday, and we will continue those hours of operation going forward, probably through the end of this week, but we'll make that decision based on how much foot traffic we're actually seeing at the facility. A couple of important updates on that. We will have Department of Licensing folks actually on site on Tuesday with their equipment so that they will be able to actually replace folks' licenses there at the facility. We have quite a few folks who have lost their licenses, lost their IDs, and DOL will physically be able to hand them a new one on Tuesday. Also, we have representatives from the State Office of the Insurance Commissioner on site. They were there yesterday, they will be there again today. We've already had reports of people who have talked to their insurers and they're being told, well, you don't have a wildland policy, so we're not gonna cover that. That's a falsehood. There is no such thing as a wildland fire rider. The only way it would not be covered by their homeowner's insurance is if there's an actual exception to that condition in their policy. So we have the Office of the Insurance Commissioner on site to help people work through that conversation. And then if we do have insurers who are creating problems, then OIC will follow up with the insurance company themselves. We also have State Farm on the ground in the community. They were set up at Lowe's. They're on North Division. They decided that was probably not the best place for them to be. So they will be transitioning out to the DAC as well to contact their policy holders in the area. Animal sheltering, we continue to shelter and care for animals out at the fairgrounds. We are hoping to start ramping that down just to allow Erin and her team time to get ready for the fair. So American Humane, who has been the lead for us on that, they're looking into providing foster care for the animals that are still unable to go home due to the destruction of, corrals and fencing and everything else. So we'll be working through that process with them this week. Related to the construction and demolition and the debris, we have a debris management meeting with our solid waste folks, all of our partners at 10 o'clock today, because that is really the primary issue of concern for folks. How do I clean up my property? How do I get started on rebuilding? What can I do with this debris? So we hope to have really good, solid information coming out of our 10 o'clock meeting that we can share out with folks on that. And then finally, Sheriff mentioned our next steps. Our primary next step is the standing up of what we call the long-term recovery group. And the long-term recovery group actually becomes a 501c3 organization, and they create the policy structure for all of this effort going forward. So we will have the group, and then underneath that as subcommittees, there will be subcommittees for the specific communities as well as specific needs. So our transitional housing, unmet needs, all of that type of stuff will be handled as a subcommittee under the policy group that we will be putting together. I will need 2 commissioners to be members of that long-term recovery group. We will also, in addition to our county commissioners, we will have 2 fire commissioners, one from Fire District 3, one from Fire District 4, several members from their community advisory boards, and then our, I guess, well-defined non-governmental and nonprofit groups who are actually on the ground doing work. Innovia will also have a seat on that group because of the amount of money that they have available. And part of the role for the group is to determine the method of allocation for those funds. So that's kind of our primary focus. It'll take, as I said, it's actually forming it together. We're in the process of pulling together a charter and bylaws, and then we have to go through the process of standing it up as a 501c3. Hopefully we can get that accomplished in the next month, and then have it moving forward as the body that's going to oversee how we move forward as a community with all of the meeting the needs and matching folks to the resources that we have.
It would seem like the 2 of you, since I had a conversation with Shelley last week about that, and she says, it's gonna have to be the county, since there's not a mayor. I think the mayor of Manitoba Lake will be on it, since there's not a mayor in an incorporated area in both your districts. It's a commitment, and you have to commit to being attending those meetings, because it's really important to have the electeds there.
Absolutely, it is.
I mean, because you've seen it from Malden, so.
How frequently are you going to plan on meeting?
So that's yet to be determined. I would anticipate that the cadence will be pretty frequent as we get started, get everything up and running, identify the needed subcommittees and things. I would say probably a good guess, probably once or twice a week to begin with, and then the cadence will be as needed to oversee the work that's happening. And I'm certainly happy to keep your staff engaged in the conversation as we build it out, so that you're aware of what we're doing.
I'm in.
Okay, thank you. Check with the other 2 commissioners, make sure you're okay with having the 2 commissioners with their districts.
Makes sense.
So yeah, and I think it's important, that it's, talking to Shelley, that again, the 2 of you really attend and not your assistants on your behalf, that it's really important for you to be there as kind of the pseudo mayor for your district. So you are.
Lowering the bar, but I guess we're okay.
No.
It's almost
So-
an insult.
Spent all this time to get away from this city.
So just seeing the bullet points here, so as commissioners, we're getting a lot of people wanting to help and all of that. Who do we direct those to you?
So right now, they can call the phone number that we have for the DAC, and I'm sorry, I don't have it memorized yet, I probably should have.
I think it's
998-2750. There we go, yes. So 509-998-2750 is our Disaster Assistance Center phone number. You can also just have them email me and we'll get it to our team that's working that. Okay. I mean, the outpouring of support has been absolutely phenomenal. We just want to be able to corral it and direct it.
No, thank you, it has been, I mean, the community has stepped up in so many ways, so it's just, it's amazing what the Spokane community can do, so. Thank you, anything else?
Not unless there are questions.
Any other questions for the sheriff or Chandra?
Good one. So I've heard mixed comments. Maybe you can provide some clarity on this. With regard to the areas, and the comment that I heard was related to I-90, but I would imagine it applied to all the areas, where the fire has gone through and, basically devastated the trees and all that kind of stuff. One person at DNR said, well, and the real word comes because we have to go back and clear all those trees because they now become fuel for future fires. And then I've heard others say, no, the trees stand because they create habitat. And what's the truth? What would happen with these trees that have been burned? Because, I mean, we always, all of us have experienced coming into Spokane and 30 miles out, it's treed on both sides and it's beautiful. And now if that all gets cleared, you're gonna end up with a bunch of fields on both sides and not trees and stuff. So what is the plan? What will happen to all those trees?
A large part of it depends on who actually owns the land that the trees are on.
Okay.
So it will, if it's the DOT's easement, they have a certain amount of easement on either side of the freeway. And then whether it's state land or we do have some federal land that was impacted by the fires. But then if it's private landowner, it really is going to depend on who actually owns the land.
Okay.
DNR does have arborists on call. They're actually here on the ground now who are they're assessing the health of the trees. If the tree is healthy enough and undamaged enough that they feel it can stand, they will do their best to do that. But the conservation district is also involved in that conversation as well. So there's all sorts of arborists and subject matter experts kind of being brought to bear. But it really does come down to who owns the land.
Okay, thank you.
My recollection, Commissioner, from my experience is if the tree canopy had less than 70% green on it, it was not going to survive. That's where the arborists come into play, and they would mark the trees. But everything else is probably going to be a future hazard, wind or something that's going to knock it over. So I'd imagine it would be the property owner's decision what they want to do on it.
I think that really was the case up in the Oregon fire where, just acres and acres and acres are just burned to a crisp. The only thing standing is the trunk itself. Everything else is gone.
There is no tree canopy left.
No. So, okay.
I was going to also ask Chandra for the solid waste. Go ahead. For the solid waste discussion today, what do you anticipate as some outcomes or some decisions points that maybe the commissioners need to be involved with?
So we're looking for more specific guidance on actual management of the debris. So we do have, as a county, we have a disaster debris management plan. So looking at what is in that plan, is it going to be possible for solid waste to set up collection points so that people can bring their debris to a collection point and not have to haul it all the way to Graham Road. And so it's part of that conversation. Part of the conversation is also waiving of tipping fees for folks, you know, if they have a load of just regular garbage that's not their demolition debris. Is there a way to provide them relief for the dumping fees at the transfer stations? And then really the big question is, how are we going to manage appropriately the folks who have to have the asbestos testing done versus those that don't? How do we communicate that? And then is there a way to share those costs? Unfortunately, since we do not yet have the presidential declaration, typically those costs are handled by the federal government, but we do not have a strong feeling yet one way or the other if we're going to be able to get the presidential declaration. So those are some of the things that I'll need the commissioners to be thinking about.
Okay, just like going to, on that, so on the presidential declaration, what do we need to try to get that?
So we're doing a really good job of collecting the information from the individual homeowners. That's what the damage assessment teams are doing, both the Red Cross folks and our state folks. We do need really good solid information from the county in terms of, was there any of our county infrastructure that was impacted? Did the county own fence line that was burned? Have any of the county roads had a fire line cut across them and now the road needs to be regraded or anything like that? So we need a good solid picture of what engineering is finding as they're out in the field, and what are the impacts that we as a county, Big C county, experienced through that. And then we're doing the same thing with Mayor Cooper out in Medical Lake for her municipal costs as well.
Couple questions, would Fairchild and kind of impacts to them be part of that narrative? Really?
No, they're military and
Separate.
entirely separate.
And I was just out there on Friday, and they really didn't have any impacts. They had some members that lived in the community that had some impacts, but Fairchild itself did not, unlike the fire that happened a couple of years ago. They did not have any direct impact.
Can I follow up real
Yes.
quick? First of all, thank you both for all your work. I'm sure you're not getting much sleep, but really appreciate you both.
It's getting better every day.
On the DAC, how's the flow of people been? And then I was wondering, is there any kind of outreach being done to folks who might be, staying in their RV or anything like that, to go out and knock on their door and say, hey, we've got resources available for you?
So yes and yes. The foot traffic has been really consistent. We do have a registration process in place. We have a lot of folks who are coming in and talking to the available state agencies, not necessarily filling out the registration form, but they are able to access the information that's there. And then last night for our community meeting up in Elk, we know that it's a little bit difficult for folks to get north down to the community college. We do have supported transportation available. If folks want to call and ask for it, we can help connect them. But what we decided to do was we took all of the information from all of the agencies and put it together in bags, and we had about 150 bags that we handed out at the community college, or at the community meeting last night, for folks who had not yet been able to come down to the community college.
So I have had multiple conversations with the Regional Clean Air Agency about how to handle the asbestos predominantly, and my last conversation, they were working with the EPA to see if they could come in with a regional mitigation as opposed to each individual lot being mitigated and stuff. And so I'll follow up with them today and find out what progress they're making.
So they'll actually be part of the meeting at 10 o'clock.
Oh, good. Okay, great. So you'll get some direction at that point. Okay, good.
Great, then we should probably let you go so you can get to your 10 o'clock. That would be great. Thank you very much. Appreciate both your efforts and can't say enough of how the great work you've done.
Thank you.
Let's see. Okay, Luke, I may have you move over here if that's okay, so you can be seen on the screen. So next we're gonna go to Luke Jasmine from the governor's office. Luke, thank you for being here today. I know you're a busy man as well.
Yeah, I might have more notes and things to report to folks. So my name is Luke Jasmine. I'm the Eastern Washington rep for the governor's office. And I've been working closely with many of you during these fires. And so the biggest questions that I received and have some answers for you today. One is about debris and debris removal. I know that's been a topic of discussion quite a bit. Our office is doing as much as possible to assist. One thing is, so with our Department of Ecology, which this would sit under, as far as private property debris removal and or testing, we do not have the regulatory authority or the resources needed to conduct testing or debris removal. As far as public property though, we do have some resources that can be accessed to help support. And the best person to contact, her name is, and I'll send this information out to Pat, so you all don't have to remember this, but her name is Brooke Beeler, and she's the Eastern Regional Director. Okay, so some of you already know that. So she should be able to help out, and you know, so it's great news for the public property, not great for private property, but that doesn't mean a no. We're gonna try everything we can to see what we could do for private property as well. And then the money stuff. So I can't give you specifics when it comes to funds that we have available, because that's still being worked out. As you heard from Chandra, there's still work being done to assess the damage at both fires. So as of right now, there is some funds out of Office of Financial Management. And there has been a letter sent in order to access those funds. The Department of Commerce has a substantial amount of funds as well. As far as who to contact for the Department of Commerce, you can contact me. Those funds, though, are at the discretion of the director. So Dr. Fong is the director now, but there is, I would say, quite a bit of funds from that. We're trying to work on housing assistance. We're trying to gather as much like unmet needs as we're hearing, and it sounds like one of those unmet needs, and I'm glad I was here, was around navigating the building codes. So right after this, I'll talk to my office and figure out what is it, is there anything that we could do? I would say absolutely explore your options as well for that. And like I said, it's short and sweet. It's the latest so far. I know we're hoping to get more around assessments as far as damage this week. I know the Medical Lake fire is, we have a lot more information on that than the Oregon Road fire. And all in all, please save my contact info. So I'll share it right now just for good of the order. So it's luc.jasmin, get ready for it, at gov.wa.gov. So that's where to reach me, and I'm pretty quick with emails, and you can also call me. My number is 360-878-1700. I don't know what you're writing down, Commissioner French. You talk to me all the time. But subject to your questions, this is kind of the latest and greatest I have. I would love to be able to take questions back to Governor in office, though.
So maybe I missed it when they were talking about this group that Commissioner Kearns and French would sit on at Innovia and kind of this long-term
Called the long-term
recovery.
recovery.
Would someone from the governor's office, was that a consideration? Because that might be helpful in identifying those commerce and other funds that could fill gaps, so.
I
Just a
don't know
thought.
who's all on it, but I would think so. I don't know, like,
Anyway, something to follow up with
are you on
Chandra.
one for
Yeah,
Walden?
I'll
Yeah.
follow up, yeah. Appreciate that.
Seems like that's the group that's gonna be looking at all sorts of funds and, you know, how to allocate them equitably, so.
In regards to the dollars you mentioned that Commerce has, are those just sort of kind of a generic unearmarked bucket of funds? Is it specifically for disasters, wildfires, housing? What are some of the restrictions around those dollars?
Yeah, so my notes say it's up to the discretion of the director. So I would imagine, I'll get more clarification around that, but I
Okay.
imagine it's really for anything,
Okay.
within reason.
Yeah.
No, because I think we're gonna see, and I mean, you're welcome to stay as we check to the Red Cross next, but I think we're gonna see that, I mean, a lot of these people now are homeless. And so is there a way to access some of the homeless funding? Because I know there's not a lot of disaster recovery funding, but I mean, these people are now, gonna be in the homeless system if we don't help provide them security. So,
Yeah, I'll definitely.
so I would think that could be, looked at, because I know
100%.
Commerce has access to some of those funds that they're using for right-of-way funding and that kind of thing, so. Through no fault of these people, they're now homeless.
Right.
So, we want to make sure we're helping and assisting. So just an idea,
Absolutely.
thank you. Are there any other questions for Luke?
Ready to have it.
I just want to say, I mean, we have seen you out there as much as we all have been out there, and just your constant contact with everybody, so thank you for that, and appreciate all your efforts, because I know you weren't getting sleep either
Yeah.
initially, so.
Well, it's great working with you all, and again, please reach out. It's great to be here with you, and thanks, Pat, for following
And
up.
like I said, you're welcome to stay if you want to listen to the American Red Cross kind of update, and you can stay sitting right there.
Oh, okay.
You don't have to do it. So, thank you. Okay, so then that's gonna transition us to the American Red Cross. So I know
Good evening.
Lacey, nice to meet you.
Yes, I'm Lacey Clark. I'm the executive director here at the Spokane chapter. Just a quick update from us. We have completed about 360 disaster assessments so far, primarily in the Wright Fire area, working towards covering some in Oregon. And I will kind of turn it over to my team to answer specific questions that you guys might have and cover some more details.
Great, if you want to introduce yourselves, that'd be great.
So I'm Lori Wilson. I'm the one you've been receiving emails from because I was here supporting Lacey in her role, trying to help with communication because it can get to be a lot. So just kind of update on our shelter counts as well. We still have the 2 shelters open, of course. Last night we had 18 people over at Spokane Falls with 1 dog. It's important, our furry pets count. And then at the Riverside, we have an indoor shelter and an outdoor shelter. We have some people are choosing to shelter outdoors in their RVs and such. But we had 1 person staying inside with their cat. And then outside, we had 12 people with 8 dogs and 9 cats. So more animals than people right now. But we also have people accessing both shelters for disaster health services, mental health, spiritual care, some disability integration. Yesterday, we were able to get some sensory kits over to the DAC for some folks that had requested that because they have maybe family members with autism and on the spectrum. So trying to find those unmet needs and figuring out how we can help during that time frame. So they're coming to the shelters, getting that sort of stuff. They're also coming for meals, so while they might not be staying with us, they're able to come and eat and get access to some of those additional services. So that's what we've been doing. We've also, you've probably been seeing us out in the community with our what we call the MERV. It's a mobile vehicle. It looks like a van, taking emergency supplies, the fire kits and water and Gatorade out to folks who are trying to salvage whatever they can from the wreckage of their homes, right? So we've also been providing those at the fixed sites at the DAC, at Redemption Church, and then up at, I think it's New Hope Church up in Elk area. So you'll see us doing those sort of things. And again, we also have our health services and our mental health folks. They're just trying to figure out and make sure we're getting people connected that might have some additional needs beyond that from the stress and from, you know, the loss of things that they might have lost. So that's kind of where we're at right now, doing disaster assessment so that we can figure out what our next steps look like and what that, you know, what that scope looks like, just like everybody. But then we're doing a lot of mutual sharing of information so that we all have what we need in order to make the decisions we need. So, yeah. Is there anything I forgot? PJ is our external relations AD.
Yeah, just here to answer any questions you might have about some of the partnerships that we have with other organizations and how we interface to make sure we're filling gaps and avoiding overlaps.
Super happy to hear that you guys are setting up that long-term recovery group so quickly. I'm from California, and I can tell you that sometimes it doesn't, not done as quickly.
Yeah.
In my counties, it took a little bit longer, and it was not the county that led it, it was community groups because the counties weren't doing it. So you guys are doing a fantastic job, and it's really glad that group getting set up is going to go so far in helping speed up this recovery process, which is not gonna be short, but they will be a tremendous help. So glad to see you guys are doing that so quickly. So just as a kudos to you all.
Thank you. Commissioner French?
So based upon your experience in similar kinds of situations, I know that one of the terms I've heard a lot is it will not be short.
Correct.
Define long.
I had.
About a year,
I don't-
2 years, 5 years?
3 to 5. I mean, that's
3 to
just being
5
realistic
years.
to have, I mean, that's, and I hate to say that, at least from what I've seen in our areas. I mean, you just went to a dedication in Okanagan.
Yeah, and
Okanagan?
two
Yeah.
weeks from now, I'll be up to finish the final home dedications of those homes from the Carlton Complex fires. In 2020? We're just finishing the last of those dedications from the long-term recoveries.
That was way before 2020.
So
I wasn't here, so I don't know the
you
exact
didn't
date.
know.
I think
2019, wasn't it?
Carlton Complex.
maybe it was
I think that-
18.
I think that was before I was a commissioner.
2015.
Yeah, I think it was 2015.
I think, well,
No,
okay,
it's Okanagan.
let me back up. They call it the Carlton Complex because that was the name of their long-term recovery team.
Okay.
So I'm not sure which fires they were, but I think they were from 2020.
Oh,
If I remember correctly, but 3 years plus.
But
that
it's,
they're still
again,
getting
to
them home.
set people's expectations, because that's really important, because, I mean, the reality is you guys are seeing it and you feel it, this is your community, you know people, your friends, your families, they've been affected by this, you probably have friends who've lost homes. And it's scary, and it's uncertain, and there's all this stuff that's going on, and you have loss, and you have grief, and you have all of it, and everybody wants it to happen quickly, and it's not, and we just have to accept those expectations. And it's gonna get really hard as the rest of the community starts moving forward with their lives as you're still dealing with this. So just be patient with each other and kind. That's the only thing I can say that, you know, is hard to do sometimes, but and try and help when we have people like we had last night at the community meeting who are getting a little feisty, they're grieving too. They're scared, and it's their way of dealing with it, but it's tough, right? So I wish that there was a way that we could make it faster. Sadly.
So question I have is like, as we do things here at the county, like if we pass this resolution tomorrow, you know, Tom Conis, our county assessor, is sitting over there, you know, with property tax relief. Are you guys able to help get that information out too as you're doing assessments and all of that?
We certainly can coordinate with your public information people to make sure that we share, because the information through our frequently shared, because we do talking points. Again, we work with so many other organizations, both governmental and private and nonprofit, that we want to make sure that we are getting as much message out. So absolutely, so I can get that information from you. I'll make sure that we can include that when we do both our social media and our other media blasts.
And then if we have that information as our team starts working with folks as for their next steps, we have that information for them. As much information and resources as you have available that we can share with our recovery team, as we start moving in, as we're moving into recovery, the better off we are, because then they have that to share with people and what their resources are.
Right, because I would think it's hard. I mean, Scott's gone through a house fire and I was in a development where there was a fire. It's just hard to get information in a timely manner to people, and and when it's just one piece at a time, it's hard for them to really, because they are grieving. I mean,
and it's overwhelming, right? It's just all this stuff coming at you.
And so the more that we can accumulate it into one document.
And consolidating that information is really a favor to the clients, because that way if they've missed it the first time, they have it in one spot. So absolutely, we want to include that.
And I think there's a certain amount of trust with the Red Cross, so, you guys do a great job, and I think the community, there's that trust there, where sometimes there's that distrust with government. And so I think, the more that you can help us get that information out, we would appreciate, I know.
We're definitely in communication with Patrick.
So I would that would be my request, is the more that we can, as we do these things, I mean, the property taxes aren't even put together, this will get figured out tomorrow,
It takes a lot of, we definitely, and Lacey, Lacey is, your executive director here on the ground will be definitely a great point of contact for sharing that information back and forth between our job that we're doing and you guys. And so I'm sure you and Patrick will be talking quite frequently, but for sure. And I just also wanted to say thank you guys, for getting the word out so quickly and helping us get the messaging that people are impersonating Red Crossers and working for access into their homes. And that is not, we will never, ever ask to go into somebody's home to assess damage. And so thank you for getting that message out so quickly, because we certainly don't want anybody, that was a little concerning to us when we heard it, so thank you for that.
Commissioner Jordan.
Thank you, guys. If we have nonprofits reaching out who kind of want to partner, I'm sure you've got lots of outreach going on. Where do we send people to figure out if they can help with?
You certainly can refer them to my team. My name is PJ Doyle. It's just pj.doyle@redcross.org. And we can coordinate it. We have a community partners team that is both compiling information as well as trying to connect exterior partners. Sometimes we're facilitators rather than actually doing the work. Sometimes that happens, and we'll be happy to do that.
And I would say, Chris, I would make sure you coordinate with Chandra.
Yes.
She's really I think she's kind of the main point of contact to help, coordinate.
She's doing a great job. And Fig Tree, the folks over there, Fig Tree, the gentleman, that's an amazing resource, you guys. That's an amazing resource.
So, any other questions for the Red Cross? I just have to say thank you for all you guys do for the community, and across the nation. I mean, it's pretty amazing how, Lacey, you get to be the executive director here, but when there's a disaster, everybody comes from all over. So
yeah, I'm from Minnesota.
There we go.
Our team we have 95 individuals on the job right now from 27 different states that came in to support our community. So
That's wonderful.
That's pretty amazing. So thank you all for what you do. Thank you.
I've toured both locations, SFCC and Riverside High School, and you run an amazing operation over
Oh,
there.
good to hear, thank you.
Well-oiled machine, so.
We'll make sure we tell our shelter managers and workers that, because they're the ones that are doing, I will tell you guys, PJ's a volunteer. 90% of this work is volunteers, and we get lucky to get paid to do this. I give her 1,000% raise every day.
I know, I'm basking in all that
She's rolling in it. So it is all the people that you've met were volunteers. So we'll make sure we pass that on, because it means a lot when they get those thank yous and to hear, because sometimes they don't always hear the work they're doing.
Just one last, I was thinking that, I remember last week, so many people were reaching out from our community wanting to volunteer. And then at a certain point, you only need so many volunteers. Were you collecting their names for like future opportunities to?
We
Get
have
folks
utilized them as
involved.
well. We
Okay.
bring them in as what is known as an event-based volunteer. So those volunteers that want to assist with this specific response. And you'll see a lot of them wearing the gray and white vests. They're the ones from our community that stood up and said, I want to help right now.
And yes, we're hosting
Yeah.
trainings so that they should
So they
never.
can become adult lunch volunteers.
That is the hope.
They'll look very good in red.
Excellent, great.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much. Again,
Thanks
thank
for
you
having
all
us, you
your
guys.
efforts.
Thank
See you later. Don't hesitate to reach out.
Appreciate it.
I wanted to ask, is there a way on the building and planning website, or even at the front desk there, that we can have like a one-sheeter that, you know, are you rebuilding because of a wildfire? And just some important tips that are very specific to the situation these people are, it's not new construction, it's not a fresh piece of land, you know, there's utilities there, they most likely have a septic system that's already in the ground, whether it's damaged or not, I mean, that's to be determined, but I mean, specific to this situation, I think that could be something really handy, to just have a one-sheeter that if this is why you have come to building and planning, here are some things to keep in mind. And then I think we should probably have one that if that's why you're there and you're rebuilding on water, because I mean, those building up north that aren't near any bodies of water is gonna be something completely different than those that are like on Silver Lake. I mean, because building in close proximity to water is a whole different animal. So I think maybe having two documents to just help our citizens, if this is why, you know, if this is the category you find yourself in on why you're visiting building and planning, here are some things to keep in mind. So is that something you think we could throw together?
Absolutely.
Okay, and so I just think that'd be handy to have, because a lot of these people they've never built a home. They purchased a pre-built home and
Don't know how to navigate it.
yeah, it's foreign to a ton of people, so.
Commissioner French.
Well, and along that same line, I was also wondering if it would be possible, well, I know it's possible, to put together recommendations for construction materials that are fire resistant or fire retardant. You know, for instance, as we were flying around, you know, metal roofs don't burn as quickly as asphalt. Concrete siding, you know, hardy board or hardy plank doesn't burn like vinyl or wood. You know, even putting the sprinkler systems, building in the sprinkler systems on the roof would be, you know, very advantageous. And I've talked to a couple insurance agents that said, you know, if we knew that the house was built of these materials, we could probably offer a break on the insurance rate and stuff. So whether they do or not, I don't know, but you know, just having those kind of suggestions, because not everybody's going to go to a designer, they're going to go to a builder and say, you know, I need to have you build this house, and maybe the builder would incorporate it, maybe not, but it would be nice to at least have that information available and leave it up to the homeowner to say, yes, I'll do that, no, I won't do that.
Yeah, putting together a, list of recommendations, absolutely, that makes great sense.
Okay.
And I know with the Home Builders Association, it's kind of, do they have, do they have one already that's FireWise? To maybe check with them, because it's really, what is the FireWise, standards, for, that as, from the fire departments, I mean, they'll come out and do a FireWise assessment. And so even just what those assessments are, which is usually perimeter, not building material, but I know when we built, we did concrete siding. We didn't want to worry, and our builders initially put in wood soffit, and we're like, no, it's all got to be concrete. So we have to, be monitoring that. And so I mean, and I think it is the thing between, may not be us, but if we work in conjunction with the Home Builders Association, because that's the concern that we talked about like last night is, making sure too that there's like a one pager, that the home builders I think was gonna look at. So that way we can hand that out as well, because what do you need to look for in a contractor? And I think, we wanna make sure people are not getting ripped off by people that will come in. And so I think it's prudent for us as the county, as they're coming into building and planning, to provide that information that you need to look for. Just because they say they're licensed and bonded, doesn't mean they are. And just because if they are, there's the potential that they were talking about, John, the sheriff was talking about last night, where they can say they've got a bond, for, $15,000, but you're gonna give them more than that, and they're gonna get 10 other people to give them more than that, then they're gonna ghost you. And so we just wanna make sure people are aware, and being smart, and the more that we can help provide that so that they don't end up having to file with our sheriff's office, the better. So I mean, just those things that, maybe, like I said, reach out to the fire department and the home builders to just talk about those things, because I think they're having those conversations right now. And so it doesn't have to be us recreating or creating it. We can just accumulate that information and provide the resources, so that they know who to contact too for additional information.
It's great.
There is Firewise information on DNR's website, but like you said, it's more for outside your home.
Outside the building,
It's sort of your landscaping around, which
Perimeter.
I still think is certainly very important, because one of the things that stood out to me when we were surveying from the air on Friday was, at least up north, a lot of the homes that were still standing had very lush green lawns around them.
Yep.
And so
Defensible wildfire space.
and when I talked to Jack Hensley, the fire commissioner from District 4, he was a former firefighter, and he even said, he's like, a green lawn can really bring up that humidity level, especially if the fire is traveling by ground. And he says, it's not a guarantee that it's going to stop the fire. He said he's seen green grass burn, but it can definitely make a huge difference. So.
It definitely does, and then what it doesn't do is when it is going from tree to tree and top to a roof, it sometimes doesn't.
Yeah.
But those are all things that, we just want to make sure that we're informing citizens with the most information that they can have to make the decisions they need to make. So I think that's, a great idea. Lonnie, you can
I would follow up on all of that, absolutely.
accumulate all those. Thank you.
There's a great need. We definitely will get the information gathered and get it available to folks. Absolutely. That's great.
Yeah, and I think we're gonna see, as the assessments come in, I think you can come up and chat too. As assessments come in, and too with the utility companies, they know which homes have been affected because the utilities are not working. They know which meters aren't connected any longer. That I think at some point we're gonna have a pretty good list of everybody that is affected that we should know, and then hopefully have that at our building and planning. So it's truly the people that need the help are getting the help. Because as we see too, in situations like this, people say they've been affected, but they really haven't been affected. To come in, as we pass this resolution, we wanna make sure that it's really the people that have been affected, that this isn't for others. And so kind of doing a little bit of due diligence on that. And I think there's ways to do it.
Just gonna say two things on the long-term recovery organization, LTRO, having unfortunately been a part of a few of these disasters throughout Eastern Washington. That's really the important charitable arm of this. So you have people who are uninsured or underinsured who are completely out. I'm sure will be a big effort around community fundraising, whether it's the Innovia Fund or something like that it helps make decisions for. And so there's a number of nonprofit organizations that will come in, but will need help with building materials for low cost rebuilds. They're just kind of your square box houses. I think they have up to 8 or 12 in Malden that an Anabaptist group from Montana that's well known that works in disaster relief has come in and done. And so that's a key part of that effort, thinking about different philanthropies in town, and even from around the state or the country that might want to contribute. It's going to be all that decision making and having people as a part of that effort that have experience in that community building and development work is really key. And then the decision making is hard because you'll have more need than there is resource. I will say that Department of Commerce was very helpful to Malden because it's a very small town in identifying and going to work with the delegation and identifying other federal funds. But the piece that I think Luke hit on a little bit this morning, which is really important as well, is the state federal coordination. Once we get to a disaster declaration and that turns on some additional resource, that still won't be enough in a lot of cases. The public assistance might be helpful to the county in terms of what the county resources are, but even if individual assistance is turned on, that program, it's a drop in the bucket towards what most people's real needs are going to be, total needs. If they had a single wide trailer, it was a $50,000 trailer. The max on that program is somewhere around $30,000, and the average check is about $3,000 from individual assistance. Yeah. So there's going to be a lot of unmet needs for the LTRO to come in, but even thinking creatively for the upcoming legislative session and other efforts, what the state resources might be if this overwhelms the county's resources. You think about 300 to 400 homes, that number escalates quickly. So just want to offer that.
So one of the other things I wanted to mention on Friday. So Karen Skoo, former county commissioner from Monterey County, she spoke with Representative Suzanne Schmidt and myself, and then the pastor of the church that Karen goes to, and they had this idea. And so I reached out to Scott Chesney Friday morning as I was driving out to the meeting, and they were wondering, what it would look like as far as permitting through building and planning, if they were to bring in like shipping containers that could be used as temporary housing on the land, for the individuals who are rebuilding their homes that still want to live on their land, and how that would work. And then, or kind of job site trailers was another idea that Suzanne had brought up. And so we kind of exchanged some information with Karen and her pastor that they were going to look at, because I mean they've got, I think, at least a dozen folks that attend their church that did lose their homes and stuff. So that's just kind of another idea out there. When I had reached out to Scott Chesney, he was saying he thought that would fall under essentially the same guidelines that are around a mobile home, but he said there'd be some flexibility there, because this would be viewed as a temporary structure, not a permanent long-term structure on the property as well. But just something I wanted to put out there that is being discussed, that people are looking at, sort of that avenue too, while their homes are being rebuilt. So
in Malden, there was a number of families that wintered in RVs, which is not optimal, where people were bringing in resources to them regularly, propane heaters and other things. But it's very common that families will want to stay on their property, and if they don't have that, the community or otherwise they get those resources.
So I'm remembering back to Katrina, when it struck. FEMA came in and they had literally tens of thousands of trailers that they deployed to provide temporary housing and stuff. Do you know whether FEMA does that anymore or not, or are there those kind of resources that might be available somewhere?
So I think that turns on with the individual assistance program.
Okay.
So it would have to be something for the governor would ask the president for that, but that would be a good question for emergency management.
I've only seen that in the really large disasters, more hurricane level.
Okay.
Doesn't mean we don't ask for it. It's just what my experience shows.
Okay.
Monty and I were talking on Thursday or Friday last week on that very topic, Commissioner Kearns, that there might need to be something that the commissioners possibly will have to do on a land use or a zoning code exemption, if you will, to allow for temporary structures. I think there's some limitation right now in our code as far as number of months. So this might be an opportunity for the commissioners to make some interim decisions in the affected area to extend that.
So you could add that as a provision to this resolution and say, if you have filed for an application, you are also granted the right to have a temporary mobile home on the property. That way, you're not having to change land use and you're tying it into encouraging people to file the application and stuff. So there's a connection, a nexus between moving forward and where they're at now.
I did discuss that with the building permit staff, and I didn't get the actual code, but they were under the impression that if you had a building permit, that you could have a temporary structure during the life of that permit, so it may already be allowed.
Yeah.
So I guess that'd be my question, because Karen had talked to me about it as well, and I mean, they're like $60,000.
Some of the job site trailers were really pricey. She was saying some of the shipping containers that folks convert into a living unit, she thought were cheaper, but yeah, some of that, she had a printout for a job site trailer and it was more than I thought it would be.
Oh, see, and I thought it was the Connex box that she was talking about, was about 60. So I mean, I guess that's the thing, is just to make sure that people understand that it's a temporary structure.
It's a temporary structure.
And
Well, even the
it's
park
not
homes,
a-
you know, you can get one of the park homes and put that on the street, and that wheels off and wheels off, wheels on and wheels off, but you know, it comes with kitchen, bathroom, all that kind of stuff.
They also had, on Friday when we discussed, they also had the printouts for those pallet homes, which we were hearing a lot about a year ago. But I mean, just as an option, I mean, it's something for folks to consider.
I just want to make sure there's no other questions that anyone has on the fire at this point in time. I'm sure we'll have more.
There's just so many angles, so many issues. So I mean, it's just and every day something new comes up. So.
Well, and you were on the long-term recovery group for Malden, so you know better than all the rest of us how.
A lot of phone calls, a lot of coordination, and I think that's what, you know, just looking at what stage we're in, and Malden have this problem, but you've seen it in Walla Walla, is the disaster after the disaster, flooding, other extreme weather as we get into winter with the burn scar. It's not fun to think about, but that's what it sounds like. Some of the funding that has been provided, hazard mitigation, and people will start having questions about how to take trees down on their property, which came up today. But you know, the more that things were done on the Malden fire, because again, it was a small town, kind of in unison or together. There's also people who under no circumstances will ever fill out a form and are not going to seek any government assistance. And you have people who are ready to move forward today. They were probably out there this weekend. You have other people who it's gonna be a few weeks before they can even think about it. So it's, people are just all different stages, and then stages in the disaster. Right now, I think I sent it around. They're in this disaster psychology, the inventory phase, trying to understand what's just happened and taking stock. And the community is certainly rallying right now. But as you know, reality sets in for some people, there's going to be a crash, and that's where you'll see coping with anger and fear and what comes next. And as you know, as the Red Cross said, the community's going to move forward, and people who are still in this stage. So just thinking about coming alongside them.
Since Monty is here, so I had two people come up last night at the meeting in Riverside and they pretty much asked the same question. They're like, is building and planning ready for what could be a flood of building applications? And that these people it implied to me that they were ready to start building, you know, yesterday kind of thing. So
Sure. Well, I've started to prep staff for this. We're definitely going to fast track these folks. You know, our resources can be, you know, directed to enhance our response for these folks. It's definitely going to be our highest priority.
Okay. What's the time, like if somebody were to come in for a building permit today, what's your timeline right now? Are you still around the 10 to 14 days?
Wow, okay.
Traditional?
I was not expecting a number today, but let's see here. Let me talk to staff and get back to you on that. I don't want to just wing that. We'll meet and we'll put together a plan and let's see what we can do, and I'll remind everybody on that.
Sounds great. Thank you.
So preliminary estimates that I'm hearing are about $500 million of damages that we will have sustained as a county. Are you hearing any number different than that?
I haven't heard of
I
it
haven't
yet.
heard the number.
Okay, all right. So
I heard fighting the fire is about 10 million each. So I saw that number on the news last night. They said it was just under 20 million. And I had heard up north that one was about 10 at one of the cooperator meetings. So about 10 apiece is what I had heard.
I don't know if that's.
But that was just fighting the fire. That wasn't damages, that wasn't anything like that.
Does that include DNR?
I think it was all in. Fighting the fire was about 10 million apiece, but that wasn't damages, just the cost to fight it.
Chandler might have a better
Yeah,
idea.
well, and I'm not sure that it wasn't a back of the napkin kind of an estimate. If you got 350 homes that have been destroyed, the average cost of a new home absent land is 400,000. You get to, 140, 150 million pretty darn quick. Double that for cars and equipment and furniture and everything else, and all of a sudden you got a number that's pretty darn close to $500 million that is going to be impacted, and that's like real money. Yeah.
No, and then it's what is kind of the government share versus the individual side, and which is what we're trying to figure out to try to get the federal designation. So.
Well, the other thing with the cost of housing, the way it is, even if you're insured, but part of that insurance has got to pay off your underlying mortgage if you haven't. So you don't have all of that money available to build new, which means you got to go back and finance the market and refinance at a higher interest rate. So you might not be able to afford to rebuild what you had just because the interest rate's going to rob you of some of that otherwise equity. So it's yes, I did go to my insurance agent and increase my coverage, it's just horrific. Well, I'm flying around on Friday, and you ladies saw the same thing. I mean, just devastation after devastation. I mean, you don't really appreciate it until you're in the air and seeing that. You can't see all that from the road. Boy, from the air, that's just, anyway.
No, and then, it just takes time to rebuild.
Yeah.
Doesn't happen overnight, so. Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair, so what is the next steps on the waste management side of things? I was looking at Scott, because I don't remember if you were Public Works Director when we had the windstorm. Because I do remember we gave people an opportunity to get rid of trees, junk, anything that happened with the homes that were damaged. I'm just wondering, what's the next steps on, if folks don't have any asbestos in there, they're allowed to, last night we talked about asbestos a lot, but they're allowed to dispose of it through normal disposal sites.
I would suggest, since they're having the meeting right now, that we hold a spot under miscellaneous tomorrow and ask Chandler to come back in, because I think that's been the most immediate question that I've heard from the community. What do we do with our debris?
Yeah.
What can we take to the transfer stations? What do we have to take to the Graham Road landfill? Are we going to assist the community in putting up containers out in various locations that here's where ash goes, here's where your combustibles
I
go,
think we did
here's.
that. I think we had temporary spots when we
Yeah.
had the windstorm.
Yeah.
Anyway,
So that would be my suggestion, because I think a lot of what they're gonna learn today will inform on where the commissioners might need to be making some decisions out.
just it'd be good if we could circle back with that, as quick as we can.
Yep, I agree.
Well, with the windstorm, a lot of that was clean green kind of a deal, so it was
It was.
easier to dispose of than.
Yeah, we didn't have
than
these
ash
issues
and-
with the testing and all of that.
there was a lot of effort
But there was a
focused
lot
on right
to
of way
get rid of.
clearing and handled by the city at the time, and then there was the ability for the community residents whose debris and stuff was in their yard to go out to the waste energy. I believe at the time the county accepted some of the debris at the transfer stations too. So
I think we
They-
waived.
My concern with putting, I mean, certainly the convenience of putting large dumpsters out in other areas, but the need for dumping is so great. I just see those filling
Overwhelmed.
immediately. Those are gonna be full. People are gonna be showing up to a dumpster that's overflowing. And then we've got another problem. Now we've just
Dumped it on the
piled
site.
it somewhere else. I mean,
Yeah.
so
and
I
likely
just-
not sorted the material appropriately as
yeah,
well.
so, I mean, I like that from a convenience standpoint, but I see the issues around that just logistically how that would actually happen, because with the number of homes completely gone, I mean, that's just gonna be so much stuff it just makes more sense to have it go directly to the transfer stations, if it can.
Well, any of the folks who have insurance, their insurance company's gonna handle all the debris removal. They're already probably working on a plan, contacting their insurance company. The insurance company's working on a demolition company to come out there and remove it. These are the uninsured and the underinsured, they're gonna be the biggest impacted as to how do they deal with their stuff. So, and like the health district put out, I think we rebroadcast it over on Friday, is there's a lot of stuff in that ash. Citizens need to be extremely careful not to expose themselves of what's in that ash, what's mixed with other household hazardous waste that was already in their sheds, their garage, whatever, asbestos siding that may have now been mixed up with that stuff. So just, I know people want to get out there and do it sooner than later, but really the health and ensuring that whoever's doing it has the right protective equipment is really important.
So Spokane Clean Air was brought up several times
Yeah,
last night, and they're very helpful if you call, if you have any questions. Is that what your understanding is? Call if you have questions.
Well, if you got questions, and I did, so Friday I found out that they're recommending that if you're cleaning up debris from a house fire, to use rubber gloves and you use a respirator, an N95, so that you avoid any airborne, because you're gonna disturb that stuff, it's gonna create dust, and get in your lungs, you don't know what's going in your lungs. It just,
It's natural, people have been sifting through to see if there's anything
know.
left.
Yeah.
Jeff, do we have any more masks left from?
No, the last of those went out a few months ago, unless Ashley has some in the county supply. The fairgrounds were all distributed to the nonprofits.
Those were just.
Believe we do, I can confirm with Tony Hall, but they would be those that the county has for like our roads crews or our parking officers, people that work outdoors, so we did keep some of those. I can find out what our count is, I'm not sure where we're at this point.
It'd just be, if we had some extra boxes, it'd be worth having a community meeting like at Riverside tomorrow. Kind of thing as people are starting to do that, because there was a discussion last night is making sure you have that personal protection, and I didn't know where we were on our supply from CARES funding, so.
Anything left would be with Ashley at the county or town.
Because I think those were N95s.
We had everything from the homemade cloth to your hospital blue to the KN95 and the N95.
Yeah, I'll find out what we still have and how much to supply. I have a couple of boxes of face shields in the HR department, but I don't think those are probably helpful.
Yeah, no, those
so,
won't work.
Yeah, so I can find out if we do have any, what that supply looks like.
And then, Monty, I was thinking the other thing to add to the kind of the list as somebody comes in is the health district with the septic systems and what they would need to look at and do. Just again, trying to have one sheet that has.
No, I'll work together with everybody to get, a sheet that we can hand out with as much information that the county has, absolutely.
Yeah, and again, even just the press release on Tom Cottis, the form for property tax relief, because in the meantime, they're gonna be able to be eligible for property tax relief. So, Thank you. I know it's like a lot to try to think of, but as I'm thinking of it, it's like,
You know, it is a lot, but we'll work together with, information and, make sure we get, because we do have people who come in who already talked about it, who've called in, so the more resources we can get to folks, the better.
okay, Scott, we'll go continue on the rest of our agenda then.
Commissioner Waldrop had asked for a discussion on the Council of Governments agenda planning to the Regional Homeless Authority.
I know, we've all been so busy with the fire response, it's been hard to put time into planning the agenda, but because we went and did the aerial view of the fires on Friday, I didn't attend, the mayor was having a meeting of different officials. I sent them some questions to consider, but I haven't heard anything back from the mayor or Brian Connington. I just thought, well, they should let us know what they think should be on the agenda for the Council of Governments meeting. But I can follow up today and find out if anyone showed up to the meeting. I mean, I know Medical Lake's a little busy, so.
I sent Ron.
Okay,
We went together.
good, Ron.
I think Ron's on with us.
But unfortunately,
was.
I sent
Oh, he's
emails in
gone
the
now.
morning and then my
Never mind.
computer wasn't connected, and so they didn't get my email till like when the meeting was starting, so I didn't realize it hadn't sent. It was hanging in my outbox.
I think what Ron had told me was I think they just started going question by question on that pre-prepared list that was which I forwarded to Jeff and to Gina. And because I think there's a lot of good questions that should probably be discussed at Council of Governments on that list as well. But Ron said they got maybe halfway through the list, they reached their hour, and everybody's like, okay, that's an hour, see you later. So they didn't get through all the questions. He said they got about halfway down the list was all.
So my suggestion was maybe starting off with, and Scott and I talked about this, and we talked a little bit about this, Commissioner Cuny and I last week, but to your questions, a week ago, 2 weeks ago, I can't even remember when we talked about it, but kind of framing why a regional strategy approach has been helpful, right, in Houston. So really kind of framing, not getting into the details of everything they've been doing in Houston, but like what changed when you had a regional approach in terms of communication, mobilization, funding. And so, I was just trying to think about starting off with framing that, because I think folks have kind of gotten a little like, well, why do we want to do a regional authority? It's like, well, can we reframe that? When we talked at our meeting at Inovia a week and a half ago, everyone at that meeting, this is pre-fire, so Mayor Cooper and everyone who was at that meeting agreed that like a one-pager with, maybe we could even zoom in someone from the government side, of Houston, who could say, yeah, before, this is the way things were, and now this is integrated in this particular way, just to kind of get a sense of how that worked, so that everybody is level set with understanding integrated versus non-integrated model, and what you get and what you don't get. So that was just a thought to, so I've been having Amy pull some information from from Houston, but Scott was like, just a one pager isn't, like having an actual discussion about it would be helpful rather than just handing out a piece of paper. So we talked about that. And then I just tried to look at each piece of the structure that seems to have a lot of questions, right? The board makeup, decision-making process, the advisory committee, the COC, and then the scope and funding and staffing. So I just kind of laid that out, and those seem to be, we can't solve everything in the conversation on the 8th, but if everyone agrees, yeah, those are the things that we really need to focus in on, then we could have a suggestion of I think we need to kind of present on the 8th what the next steps could look like. I'm just concerned that we need to have a project manager or someone that's owning this. Especially we're having the city and the county converse about the funding sources and the staffing. But I don't know what that looks like. And so to me, that's kind of something I don't know if the whole group needs to agree to that, or if we just need to figure out between the city and the county, like who's the point person that's gonna move this conversation forward over the next several months? Is it someone from the county? Is it someone from the city? Or is there like a project manager or neutral person that could help do that? Because I think Rick, Gavin, and Teresa, they're volunteers. They're willing to keep volunteering to get data and research and give suggestions from their government experience. But they can't be a full-time like project manager moving it. So I think it's important too that we have some sort of suggested timeline or transparency around decision-making over the next couple months that we either discuss at the meeting or maybe we get agreement from folks as to what it looks like. So those are kind of what I proposed, and I can forward the email. I just didn't want to do a public meeting or public email. I sent it to Jeff and Scott so they could forward it on, but I sent it to Mary. And so those were some of the things. It's like kind of an overview and getting people's kind of resetting around what a regional model could be helpful in doing. And then maybe getting agreement around here are the structural things that are the sticking points that we really need to dig into. And then what does that process look like over the next 2 to 3 months? Because I think the community, when there's not a clear process, both elected officials and community members get really antsy. And then they start to fill that space with a lot of, I don't know if I want to use the word conspiracy theories, but you know what I mean? Like, oh my gosh, something's happening behind the scenes. It's like, no, not really. But if there's a clear process that we can articulate and maybe a couple community workshops or open houses where a new draft is, discussed, that might provide a real good transparency moving forward. So those are just questions and ideas that I threw out there after looking at all of the list of questions that's been generated. So,
Commissioner French, and then I'm gonna let Jeff.
So when you talk about staffing, does that include like a union contract negotiations?
well, I think you have to, both the city and the county have to have conversations with their employees, right?
Well,
About
yeah,
what that
but
would look like.
What I was asking is, you referred to staffing issues, and I was wondering whether in your mind, the definition of staffing issues included union contract negotiations as well, or not? Is that a separate issue that we need to address, or is that something that we need to address under the bigger heading of staffing? That's the only question.
no.
And stuff, just to make sure we don't lose that, because
No, it's really
that was
important.
a big stumbling point on Shrek.
Right.
And I just anticipate that it's going to be a big stumbling point here too for us.
Yeah, you want to keep people engaged early and often from the union
Well,
leadership perspective.
yeah, union leadership's got to be there, and then, believe it or not, they all don't think alike and stuff, and that becomes a whole nother issue, and seniority and benefits, it just goes on and on.
Well, and I think the reality is it's not gonna be combining, it's not everyone from our community services and the city's community services that are going to this organization.
It's dependent on the scope and the resources.
Yeah.
That kind of, the staff will, and that's why we really need to dig down into what funding streams, that we looked at from George's presentation, right? And the city needs to do the same thing. Which funding streams do they wanna commit to this new regional entity? Because the staffing follows the funds.
Yep.
And I think it's still, that's one of the questions is, the commitment was always our current funding level, not additional funding level. because it's supposed to be more efficient and effective and require less funding than what it was, and then they go after grant funding. So I mean, so I think that's still one of the things that it's like, it's not streams, it's our current funding levels for what move over.
Not all the money that could
Yes.
potentially go to homelessness.
Ashley had a
Yeah, and just from a staffing perspective, you know, before we even have conversations with our bargaining units and our employees, to be fair to them, typically we know what positions we're even looking at moving or what work, right? Because that might be, to your guys' point, some people move, some don't, based on the work that's being done. And so before we even know what that is, it's difficult to go start impact bargaining, because at this point, I don't even know if we're talking 2 people or 10 people, right? Or what that looks like. So, you know, there's, I think, a lot of pre-work for staffing before we even get to the point where we can have productive conversations, not just with the union, but with our own staff as well. So once we know what that looks like, or wherever you can tag me and my staff in, happy to help. But that's, I think, for me, more critical before we even start looking at impact bargaining, is really understanding who's moving and what does that work look like.
Definitely.
So these are the questions that have been submitted to date. Everyone in this room who's been elected to office has been requested to submit questions. Brenda has been working with the mayors, trying to receive questions back. The top 14 are what Brian Coddington has sent around. So I'm guessing most of you have seen those. I don't necessarily have the background on those to know if, you know, that's more mayor's office or if it's an outcropping of the Friday meetings. I don't have that background yet. I was hoping if you guys could look through these and maybe just write like 1 through 5, 1 through 10, your top priorities for the COG. I'm not thinking for creating this, but actually for discussion at the COG. I took notes, Commissioner Waldron, on your thoughts as far as framing stuff you just spoke to. I was hoping to try to put this maybe into some sort of a priority order, see where there's some consensus around what we need to get to. I have not gone through this to dedupe some other stuff. It is in its raw form. I just added numbers for ease. And then we could start putting together, you know, maybe a rough outline of thoughts for how the COG would go. I know Scott has talked a little bit about maybe trying to find appropriate people to pre-answer, not pre-answer, but we have them pre-prepared. So they could come in knowing, you know, Mr., Mrs., whoever could answer some of these questions that have risen to the top. Just different brainstorming ideas we've had.
Right, like you could do a panel of folks, but who's on that panel is determining, like, yeah, we would.
What do you want to hear?
What are
will dictate the who.
topics we really want to dig into? Yeah.
And if you don't like this idea, give me a different one, I'll work with it.
No, I think it's just, it's, you know, it's gonna be kind of, you know, there's gonna be questions that come up that, you know, there, I mean, these questions will make people think of other questions. I mean, so there's just, you know, but that's, we've gotta start the conversation. This is a way of starting the conversation because we haven't had the conversation with you, right? All the entities, and so it's at least, I see it as trying to debunk some things, but then, you know, like Andrew's saying, what's really the main things that are really hanging people up to try to even move forward. So.
I think this is too many for
Yes.
one.
We never get through all
Right, no.
So that's why I was hoping to reduce this to 10 or less, something that might be more manageable for the COG time constraints.
And I mean, I guess, you know, we passed the resolution saying that our staff would be available for questions. I mean, has Rick and Teresa, do you know, been asking follow-up questions or any of that?
I'm not, I think they've been communicating with George, but I think he's provided a lot of information already. I don't know how much additional support they've asked for George or information from George. To this date, I don't know if they've asked for anything else from the legal side or Randy from financial, no. My sense is we've given a lot of information support already, but we're still available if they are asking.
My sense is that the city of Spokane is where a lot of the unknown, that they hadn't done that analysis fully that George had of all the different. So I was gonna reach out to Kim McCollum at the city and just share George's presentation, because I think that would be helpful in that how they could identify the different buckets like we have, and so that it might be easier to start to categorize, you know, some of the different funding streams, so.
And I'll just say with the city of Spokane, I mean, Scott and I were on, during COVID, the committee, we had this committee on homelessness the entire time as we were trying to figure out how to help the homeless during COVID and all of that. And we asked for this from the city since 2000. And they've never been able to produce it yet, which has been interesting. So, so hopefully, you know, with the mayor's resolution, you know, as well, that.
So
that they're
supposedly
getting
this
that
Thursday, we have another check-in meeting. It's on the calendar at 4 p.m.
We do.
with other elected leaders from the area. So we can ask those questions, find out if they've been getting more data and dollar amounts, you know, from the city of different funding streams. I guess since the city and the county are really the main entities, although each city does have those recording fees, right, that can be put towards homeless services and housing. We're really the main entities that probably need to sit down and negotiate a lot of these details that like the city of Liberty Lake or the city of Cheney don't really need to be involved with, you know what I mean? So
I think the valley needs to, I think the valley needs
agree
to
with the
remain
valley,
part of it,
but
yes. So.
but a lot of like the staffing questions that we were just talking about. So I guess I'm just thinking, once we know more, I don't know how many RSVPs we've had for the 8th.
About 40 last I heard.
Okay.
That's probably 5 business days ago.
A ton of people will show up without RSVP.
Yeah, I know.
They just show up.
Woodwork. Yeah.
I think it would be important to reset around the regional authority. Like some of these questions here are all about like a PDA and a regional authority and you know, which elements from the Houston model translated. Like it just seems like maybe a half an hour around level setting around what a regional model is versus everybody doing their own strategy might be helpful. And I was just thinking the assistant to the mayor in Houston, he could speak from a government perspective, not necessarily the nonprofit, but the actual government that had to realign how it did things, you know? Because I think he was with the original mayor and now he's with the next mayor. But anyway, just a thought. We might be able to we never really got a chance to ask a lot of our questions to the gal from Houston when she came to town. It's almost like she was interviewing us. And we're like, no, we have questions for you. So not specifics. I don't want to go down a rabbit hole of like, well, what strategies did you use? It's more like, how did a structure end up being more efficient, to your point? Were you able to bring in more dollars? Were you able to then deliver more services? Because I'm assuming they started with the same dollars they had at the beginning.
Yeah, that was my understanding, and it was actually restructuring the nonprofits. So instead of the nonprofits all doing basically a lot of them the same thing, and, each doing, getting their own funding sources. They really restructure the nonprofits that we're gonna give you Catholic Charities money to do this, and we're gonna give you Volunteers of America money to do this that is separate, but coordinated, than what we're gonna pay, Catholic Charities to do. So that was part of my understanding that I saw was that. So I mean, which hasn't really been talked about. I don't know if they've talked about it with the nonprofits, but that was part of how they made it more efficient, was really being coordinated in how they were delivering services. Because again, the services were still being, it was, contracts from the entity that were going to the nonprofits. And so that was what drove the nonprofits to then to be part of it and come along with making that, more effective. And I don't know if any of those conversations have happened here.
So did any of you, no, I'm not campaigning, I'm just sharing information. Did any of you happen to see I think there was mayors from 2 communities up in Alaska that have determined that from a humanitarian perspective, they are going to give a plane ticket to people that are homeless to Southern California to go through the winter months, and then that way they don't have to worry about freezing.
The mayor of Anchorage, I saw that.
And so, it was an interesting twist as opposed to, what Texas and some of the other communities are doing, shipping everybody to New York just to get them out of the state or get them out of the community. This was being approached from a humanitarian standpoint about, it's going to get cold here during the winter, and so it's in your best interest to go to Southern California. Thank you very much. Here's a plane ticket. I thought, well, that's kind of an interesting approach. Not campaigning, I'm just sharing information.
No, they were very open about it.
Very open about it.
It wasn't some under the radar thing. It was like the mayor speaking at a press conference stating, this is what we're doing. And it was like, wow. So, yeah.
It gets cold here in the winter.
So the other thing is trying to find a facilitator for, and the one person that we had identified isn't able to do it.
Yeah, I reached out to Avista to see if their facilitator had some availability. They do not. So we're still on the hunt. Commissioner Waldorf gave me another contact over at Whitworth. I've left
From the
a
city of the
message.
Valley, they use this person to facilitate some community meetings.
Yep.
So,
I was hopeful that Avista would, if there was availability, they would offer up that as support. I don't know whether Whitworth will do the same thing, but I've got a phone call to them to see. But right now, we do not have a facilitator for the Regional Homeless Authority conversation.
So you're looking for people?
Yes.
I'd suggest, it's not something she does as a career, but something that she's very good at, and that's Marnie Dickinson. America has clearly got an interest in, STCU has got an interest in this issue, and maybe they'd be willing to offer her up.
well, I'd be willing to, the Whitworth thing got me thinking about Gonzaga might have some folks in their department of is it leadership studies or what have you? Anyway, I know they're starting up this next week, so that all these schools are getting kind of busy, but a university contact is always kind of a good neutral facilitator.
Yeah.
So I can look around the School of Business or Leadership Studies. Amy can make some help out, maybe coordinate with Rebecca this week. Because I think having a facilitator would really be helpful, but we want to get them on board, and they need to give their input into the agenda and help shape it and, make it make sure they're comfortable leading the conversation.
Yep. Well, we need to know what the conversation is going to be, how the run of the show will be, if you will. So we're going to have panels, or we're going to have anyone zooming in, or are we going to just go through the questions? Need to lock that in so the facilitator knows what they're facilitating. So.
I do think a couple of the questions on here are about kind of what is the next steps of conversation? You know, can we provide a clear picture of the runway to establishing a regional collaborative? You know, how do we engage different community members over the next several months? Is that something that you think is a discussion, or should we have a draft proposal to kind of share?
I circled I found 8 questions that I thought should be asked. I slid those over to Jeff, but
Yeah, I guess I would say I don't want to have a draft proposal because that is not, the intent is everyone coming together to kind of ask questions and, you know, and figure out what do we think collectively do we want the next steps to be. So I don't want to have a draft proposal because then that looks like we're driving it.
Right.
And I don't want us driving it.
because anything we come up, I mean, no proposal passes from just one jurisdiction. You need another
I'm just
jurisdiction to
thinking
be
like
collaborative.
a straw person, something that people can go, yeah, that has some, you know, it's just hard in a big group of like 60 people to come up with the next steps. So I'm just trying to balance, like, could there be some suggestions of what the next steps could be? And then
You are welcome to bring
people.
suggestions.
Maybe I'll raise my hand, because I just think that that's something important. To leave this meeting, we should have some sort of direction from all of these different electeds.
Well, and I think that's what
On
I would
next
hope
steps.
the facilitator could help guide us to get to that point, as to, you know. But I just don't want us driving. We are literally, all I see us as the Council of Governments is facilitating the conversation. We're bringing everybody together to have the conversation, not to be driving it or directing it, because it really has to be, each jurisdiction is going to be thinking about it, feeling it, and I just feel like, you know, again, there hadn't been anything since the meeting of the presentation, you know, so there's never really been, you guys are in meetings, but, you know.
But it's not
everybody. And
Attendance has been really shoddy and spotty.
Yeah, the summer's been a tough time.
So I think this is really the opportunity for us to come together and you know, kind of talk about it for the first time, which is why trying to come up with some set questions that is just accumulation of the questions that are being brought forward, you know, lends it that we're not driving it, we're just the facilitator for it.
But we can set some meeting, you know, goals, and one of those could be that the facilitator helps facilitate what the next steps would be.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, definitely.
Yeah, okay, that sounds like a good.
Sorry.
Go ahead. No, you.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, the questions I circle are the ones that I think most people are coming up and asking me, how does this work? How does that, so it's like, okay, clearly these are questions that people are asking. Can you slide a bit? So, you know, like.
Just say which ones they are.
So 2, 3, 5, 7, 8, 10, 16, and 22. Those were the ones that I circled, and these are ones that I've heard people ask me, you know, can you know, the financial commitments, where's the money coming from? I've heard a bunch of people ask that. People say, how will the funding be used? That's another one that people have asked a lot. How is this proposal differ from what is currently being done?
Right.
So what
That's important,
you know,
that's
how,
setting the stage,
you know,
yeah.
this is how services are delivered today. How does this change that? That's another question people have asked. How do we measure return on investment? You know, how would we know that this new entity is better than what we used to do if we do it? How do we appropriately identify and acknowledge differences between the partner jurisdictions? So I mean, every city addresses homelessness differently. Every jurisdiction, I think, has a different philosophy around homelessness. How do we bring all of those different mindsets together? How does prevention factor into this proposal? That's one that has come up at almost every single one of our Thursday meetings is, so how much of this new entity is going to be focused on people who are currently homeless, and how much of their efforts are going to be focused on preventing people from becoming homeless, not even letting them get into the system of homelessness. What should the process for nominating and selecting board members for the Regional Homeless Authority look like? That's another one I've been asked about a bunch. So who picks the 5 electeds and who picks the 8 or non-elected? Is it a majority vote? Is it a super majority? How do people apply for that? How do the first ones get picked? And then what are the main lessons learned from other coordination efforts that have been viewed as less successful, such as King County? Because that's another one. People have said, how are you guys going to make sure this just doesn't end up like King County?
Sounds like your question.
So those.
And that could be covered in that over kind of level setting conversation around both successful and maybe not as successful approaches to regional.
I picked them based on, these are questions that I've heard over and over and over from a variety of people. That's how I picked mine.
What would be your reaction to having a facilitator that has familiarity with the topic as opposed to a facilitator that's coming into it cold? I guess, I'll just continue. What I'm thinking about is, is this maybe a role that Chris Patterson can play?
I don't know that he's a good facilitator.
He's not a facilitator, but I just a thought, and I don't know that it's a good thought or a bad thought, I just throw it out.
I would personally want somebody that hasn't taken a public stance on support or opposition to it. Because somebody who's very supportive of it or somebody who's very opposed to the concept can certainly lead the discussion or kind of guide it in a certain direction. So I would honestly want somebody who knows very little about this, just knows how to, okay, who else has a comment? Go ask them, go and make sure that individual doesn't sort of interject any of their biases or feelings to the topic. I think that would be more important to me.
Yeah, and someone who, it's really the facilitator is, this is what I hear your question, and then gets to the heart of it and doesn't let someone run on and on, because we're not gonna have time for people to run on and on. So yeah. And I shouldn't say that Chris isn't a good facilitator, I don't mean it that way.
No. He clearly has a bias, but
I don't know that that's his strength, is facilitating, a conversation, I think. He's got such great information and he's very knowledgeable. It's like Jeff would be able to do it as well with all his HUD experience as well as what Chris has.
Yeah, Jeff is tainted because he's one of us. And well, that's not a negative, it's a positive, you're one of us. But what Chris has got a passion, but it was just an idea. It doesn't deserve being pursued anymore. It's fine.
Well, I might throw out, am part of the housing authority. I don't know how involved she's been with this. She's more of a houser versus this world, but she's on the edge of it. I've seen her run a good meeting. She was a COC chair. I know her from my time at HUD. I was always impressed.
I know we've gone back to this guy many times for many things, but Jerry Kimmel. he's sort of our go-to when we can't pick anyone. It's like, just give it to Jerry. Yeah, I don't know.
It might be an interesting, I think we'd have to check in with her to see if she would seem to be, biased in any particular way. But I think Pam's great. She's good at leading meetings, definitely.
Which is what this really is. It's really just, again, driving the momentum of the conversation. conversation. It's not driving the conversation. It's just
Because I don't think
making
she,
sure we
like,
get.
the housing vouchers and everything, it's related, definitely,
Look perfect.
but
I love
it's
the way she
not,
runs the meeting.
yeah,
She's polite, but she keep control.
Politely pushing.
politely organized, yes. So I do think that it'd be good to talk about, I think the challenge will be, like, how will the funding be used is a question that everyone asks. I think the reality is, we don't have the answer to that yet, but we have to talk about that to some degree, because until we have a structure and a decision-making, this is kind of what we talked about at Innovia a week and a half ago, is like, we will have to create the best transparent organization that's accountable to, you know, all of the entities that are involved with it. But we are gonna have to let that organization develop the strategic plan based on whatever is already out there with the HUD, you know, 5-year plan. And a lot of the uses will come through that leadership, right, of this new organization. But a lot of it's driven already by the current, you know, HUD 5-year homeless plan and other plans. But it's hard because people want to know what it's going to do. But if it doesn't exist, then that's what we talked about.
Yeah.
If it doesn't actually exist, then it's kind of a moot point what it does.
It's kind of that chicken and the egg type
Yes.
thing, and it really is a leap of faith that, yes, I will stand up an organization and I'm just gonna trust them to do what's right. I mean, but the thing is, like, I can pick 13 people and throw on a board that I can guarantee you will crash that thing into the ground. I mean, it's like, I can pick 13 people that I have strong confidence and I'm sure they will be very successful. But at this, I don't know who the 13 people are gonna be. So is it gonna be people who are going to do really bad? Or is it 13 people that are gonna do really good? And you don't know that until you pull the trigger to move forward. So, I mean, I think we all know 13 people that it's like, yeah, I could put those 13, and yeah, they'd really run this thing into the ground, make homelessness worse. I mean, so.
Not name names.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's like, I know 13 people that are really good that I think are good. And I bet a bunch of you around the table would disagree with me that those 13 people would do good. So it's, you know, it's tough.
And that's why you circled the question about, like, what is the process of nominating and selecting board members?
Yeah.
Because that's a really critical, if you can create trust around that process and like a draft job description or whatever of what you'd be looking for in each of those positions, you're gonna do the best you can to create the most transparent process possible. But yeah, it's gonna require a level of trust eventually. So building trust in the process is just really important, I think, that.
Yeah, well, and, you know, and I know too, that, you know, I think I talked about it before, you know, making sure that we still have, isn't that board that's this, you know, really becomes the de facto COC, because you have to have a COC to get funding from HUD. So there has to be, you know, that's part of what Pierce County was talking about with, you know, developing the board was, you know, ensuring that it met the COC requirements in a way, because that's how you get HUD funding.
I would say more becoming the fiscal partner to the COC, or what the city is right now, because you have to have a fiscal partner with your COC. Rare examples you can do one of these things.
So I am not an expert on that angle, but there was somebody from the city at the last meeting at Innovia that was saying the COC cannot be merged with another entity, that it must remain a standalone entity, correct? Is that what she was saying? Like, they can play a role, but you can't like merge them with this new entity. They can't become one, but I guess they can collaborate to some extent, but they seem to be saying that it becomes a gray area. So the COC must remain a very recognizable, separate, standalone organization.
It's an independent body.
Yeah, and so it was somebody from the city that works in that realm that was saying this at the last
So I
meeting
think
we had.
that's, you know, but that would be part of the questions.
Yeah.
Is it
Is
how does that
how
work?
does that work?
But to your point, Jeff, that is true, like, there's this independent body that is required by HUD, but it advises a fiscal agent in decision, who actually makes the decisions and distributes the funds, and will that now fiscal agent be the new PDA, right? And how does that transition process work?
And that was in our current makeup, the city of Spokane used the COC to be, like, they were making the financial decisions, where the county wasn't having the COC make the decisions. We were taking their advice, but then the county was making the decisions on our funding. So it, I mean, that's why it's one of those things that it's like really trying to understand, you know, how that would look moving forward, you know, for me, and making sure, because I want to make sure that, again, if the HUD dollars go to this other organization, I don't want them coming to either the county or the city, but that's part of what we're trying to do, is to have it be there. So, yeah.
So maybe if we had a diagram or some sort of like little presentation on that, on the 8th.
I think it gets something.
Kim could explain it.
And Kim can explain it well. We could get the Washington State Director probably to zoom in from HUD. We need to start calling people.
Yes, I know.
Yeah, so we need to settle on how the run of the show is gonna be. So as you have your ideas, send them to Jeff and myself, and then we need to pin a facilitator. So if you've got ideas, people that you know think would be a good job, if you reach out to them and we can get someone selected hopefully this week for it, I think that'd be very helpful.
So I have responses from 2 commissioners. I'll work with responses I received.
Thank you, Jeff.
Okay, so that's gonna take us to, we're already just after 11, so it's gonna take us to Wendy.
Good news.
Hey, you have good news for
I
us?
have good news.
Okay, awesome.
We'll get to that in a little bit though. We'll start with the, wait till Josh, Chris, come back. Do you want to pull up the financial one first?
We do plan to do an executive session with Chris House.
Okay. Do you have, Rebecca, do you have this one or not? That Gina sent out.
It was in the packet.
It was in the packet, that's fine. If you don't, I will just talk to it.
Or it was attached, right?
Yeah, it was
Gina,
an
to your
attachment.
email.
That was the 7-month revenue. So from the 7-month revenue and expenses, did you want me to start?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. 7-month revenue, sales tax, we've collected 54.5% of our budgeted this year so far for the first 7 months. When you look at the 22, it says we collected 60.9%, but that is what we had actually budgeted. We actually, at the year end, we actually collected $76.2 million last year. So we were running at 54.6% through July of what we actually received. So we're running very close from a percentage standpoint. So I think right now, with the last few months of sales tax, we're probably looking at potentially hitting our budgeted sales tax numbers. So, and this percentage just kind of leads to that as well. You'll see property tax, of course, we're less than last year, but our percentages are close to the same. For that reason, in 22, we did the levy shift, which we did not do in 23. So that's why the sales tax is lower. And then the other revenues, they all look like good. They're on track. So I would expect us at year end to still be fairly close to our revenue projection of the $245 million for this year. like I said, and we'll talk about sales tax a little bit later, when we get into the sales tax presentation.
What's driving the other revenue?
I didn't have that answer with me, and so I was kind of looking through that. I know we did get some one-time revenues recently, but I don't have a full answer, so I'll have to get that full answer for you. I know there was a settlement from Monsanto, which was 3.7 million. That's in that number. So, but I'll have to do a little more digging. I didn't bring that with me, so. The revenue side, we're in good shape. Sales tax, like I said, it's tracking right where we should be for this year. On the expense side, we've gone through 58% of the year. So as you see those departments on the right, 58%, that's people that are about right on with what they should. That means they'll probably be very close at year end. So you have a lot of departments in the 57 to 60 range. I would expect by year end, most of those departments will be very close to actual and have very few that we will need to watch as we get closer to the end of the year. All of our salaries, benefits, about where we expect them to be. The biggest plus we have right now is in the supplies area where we're spending a little less than normal. But right now, we believe that the expenses will also be on budget. So we don't foresee having any need to use any of the contingency money at this time that we do have. So, any question on expenses? Then we'll go to the good news, the July sales tax report. This one is complete. I did, and we'll touch on the August afterward. We don't have the complete report for you for August yet because we are downloading the final numbers today. But the August is based upon the preliminary numbers the state gave us late last week. So in July, we were actually up 6.1% year over year for July. Now that follows 3 months where we were down, 0.21%, like a 0.6. So this was a big swing, very positive numbers. A lot of, as we get into this report, you're going to see a lot of areas that were significantly better than 22. Like car sales, residential housing, food, and beverage, and we'll get into those. And remember, this data is from May. So this data, we expected the food to be better because of the Bloomsday. And we expected to see the same thing in August because we had Hoop Fest. So, but yes, we are 6.1% higher. We are 2.7% higher year to date. Once we get to 3%, we will hit our budget amount. So we are very close at the end of July. We did plan a 3.9% increase in sales tax for this year, but we based that on our estimated collections of 75.5 million. We actually ended up with 76.2 last year. So if we exceed last year by 3%, we will hit our budget. So we're getting very close on the 2.7. Skip forward a couple, just skip forward 3 pages and we'll get to the construction right there. As you can see, residential construction is back up in May. It exceeded May of 22. You will see that trend continuing in June as well. Although we don't have the final numbers, you will see that trend continue. Non-residential is below 22, and that trend is also continuing into June. Next page, car sales, significantly higher. Seems it's been very flat for the last 3 months. That will continue also in June with an uptick. Part of that in 22, remember we had inventory issues. And now the inventories are better and people are still buying cars. So we have a huge increase there. Used vehicle sales is about the same as last year. It'll go down a little bit, but it's lagging behind 22, but used car sales or new cars are exceeding that. Next page, auto repairs. This one is counterintuitive. Usually when you have new car sales, auto repairs go down because people are getting rid of the cars. But used auto repairs is still running higher than 22. So not quite sure why that is. Some people are still hanging on, I guess. And it actually ticks back up. It will tick back up next month when you see the final report for August. Of course, other vehicles on the bottom, that's still tanking. Nobody's buying RVs anymore. They did all that in 20 and 21 when they had all their money and boats. So that has not changed. Next page, accommodations and food services. This is an area that we had expected to see an increase in over 22, and we did. This again, part of that would be because we had more people here for Balloons Day in 23 than we did in 22. And you will see that spike up even more when you get your August report because we had the big food fest wellness teams. So that area is still remaining strong for us, as well as the accommodations and food services. Those areas are remaining strong, increasing at about the same line, if that parallel line there from 22, it's just tracking pretty consistently over. So that's good news. Second to last page, next page, retail trade home centers. So this would be your Home Depots, your that actually went back up this month. So more people going out there. This is, unfortunately, this is an area that will probably keep increasing here in the near future. So, and then accommodations and food services, except casinos, again, is going up higher than last year. So on that last page, if you look at our major sectors, all of our major, where we get most of our sales tax from, a little over 70%, they are all up over 22 for the month of June. And you will see that trend continue in August. So now if we want to jump to August, that's the one I just sent out today. And again, I just sent out the one sheet. We were concerned when we got July, was this going to be a 1 month blip? Because it can happen based upon reporting. The August collections are of course based upon June, and we are still up 4.4% year over year in August. So that brings our year to date up to 2.9% over last year. So that is very close to that 3% number we need to hit budget. So I know we still got a few more months, and as we get into budget season, a little more optimistic on sales tax than I would have been 2 months ago. We'll keep refining that number as we get closer, but right now I would expect that we'll be very close to meeting this year's budget, and I would expect to receive more sales tax next year than we had budgeted for this year. Any questions?
I can't remember, did we have a robust pig out in the park last year?
It happened. I don't know.
It happened, but I don't know that it was as robust as what they're talking about this year. But I mean, the weather's gonna be good, you're gonna have the county fair, and so I'm just thinking about food and accommodations, things like that. Should have a positive August and a really positive September with those two events,
So last half of the year is always the strongest from a sales tax collection, and we are entering it at the same percentage of last year's true year-to-date collections. So, I think it's very positive.
Revenues increase with your waste line.
Randy,
Yeah.
I learned last week that auto repairs are up because of the number of stolen vehicles.
Okay, so it's related to crime, okay, perfect.
There is a.
That's not a good correlation, but I understand.
From personal experience, maybe?
Unfortunately.
Thanks. Can you come back next month with more good news?
I would
please?
like to, I would really, really like to do that.
If there's good.
Yeah, I'll send Jason otherwise, he's back doing the budget right now, so I got to take the glory one, so.
Sounds good.
So Commissioners, just for your awareness, next Tuesday, Randy C will be presenting the preliminary budget roll-up, that's statutorily required. First Tuesday of September. Yep. So you'll get your first look at preliminary budget, revenues and expenses for the general fund. And then, because we're not meeting on the 4th for our strategic planning meeting, because it's Labor Day, we're planning on the 11th, and that'll be a pretty robust budget workshop, first of them with the commissioners. We've got some other things on there too, that Scott Chesley from planning wants to talk about, a couple other ideas, just keeping that in mind.
And House Bill 1257.
And presentation from Gail on House Bill 1257 as it relates to county facilities.
Ashley, welcome.
Thank you. Well, to follow Randy, as we've been looking at budget. So for our two new commissioners, I know I've briefly touched on this, but just kind of some history. Parking for the Spokane County lots falls under the parking department that is a part of the Human Resources Department. So it seems odd that I'm the one that's here today talking to you about parking. But at some point of time, the HR director must have drawn a short straw and parking landed there. So I enjoy operations a bit though, so I'm happy to continue to keep it moving forward. So as we've been looking at budget and past years and future years, I've really been trying to wrap my brain around where we're at and where we need to go. So next slide, please, Rebecca. Currently, our county parking fund in current state is a general fund account. So it is had much history over the years. At one point it was general fund, at another point it became split between general and a special revenue. And then in 2022, it moved back into just general fund because we had been consistently running at a loss. And so similar to what we've seen with some of the other departments that were at one point maybe in enterprise that had to move back to general because of funding, that's the point that we're at today. Types of expenses that we see for parking are things like snow plowing, gravel, cleanup, maintenance, parking patrol labor, fuel, any software and technologies that are needed for that, any supplies. Types of revenues that we have on the parking side. So we have our public parking meters. We have public parking jurors that we work with Superior Court on. We have employee parking, vendor parking, department parking, and then the Spokane Regional Health District. So those are our kind of balances that we try to get into. So on the next slide, what I did is I went back to 2020 and I really looked at what are our expenses versus what are our revenues for the last few years to really begin wrapping my brain around what do we need to do moving forward to get back into the black and to start building a fund again. And so what they see on this slide is our total expenses in 2020, 2021, 2022, and 2023 is through June 30th of this year. And you can see our expenses surpassed our revenues for each of those years that I reviewed. Initially, I thought, could this be tied to just a COVID thing? What might this look like? That does not appear to be the case. I can't really see that being the trend, especially looking at this year where we're fully open and we're still projected to run under our revenues. So we'll still have more expenses than revenues. So it really strikes me as we probably need to really be looking at what our rates are, what we're doing with our expenses versus our revenues as we move forward, and how do we start looking at that. So I went and looked at what have our rates been over time. So next slide, please. And if you look at the rates over time, we all know, those of us that park on the county campus, it is very low cost for parking in downtown Spokane. I've managed parking for other facilities. I worked at downtown many years ago, and our rates are lower than what it was back then. So as you look at these, I went back to 1999, which is the furthest resolutions I could find back in our resolution directory. And I looked at all of the different ways that we currently have revenues coming in to really just gain an understanding of what have our rates done over time. So if you look at that last column that says change over time, since 1999, that is how much we have increased our rates over time. So for temporary day parking, it's gone up $2. Our motorcycle passes have stayed flat. Surface parking has increased $5. Covered parking has increased $5. Department use $5. Public agency, which is your Spokane Regional Health District, $5. And then vendor has gone up $5. Everything else has stayed flat. So when I really looked at this and then really compare how much expenses have gone up, right? So rock and gravel and snowplow and technology just to run our systems, labor, right? All of those things have increased significantly since 1999, which is really impacting why we're seeing such a difference between what we're getting from revenues versus expenses. Next slide, please. So then I went and I looked at what campus parking spaces do we really have available to us at this point. And there is a pretty significant amount. We do have quite a few spaces, but based on the way that we are currently charging parking as well as utilizing parking, it's part of why we see that gap. The other thing to note is that Lot M and part of Lot A, so that lot that's between juvenile and human resources, so that kind of skinny lot, that is all SPD essentially at this point. And then so is a good chunk of Lot A, which is out in front of our facilities building. And that contract was negotiated several years ago with SPD, and none of the funds from that contract are actually realized in the parking account. So it's just part of the overall contracts between the city and the county for the facility usage. And so those funds are not allocated into this parking amount. That said, it might make up a small difference, but it still wouldn't put us back in the black for what we're charging them. That contract is up for renewal if and when we want to look at it. We would need to notify them by December, which then would allow us to start negotiating that contract 6 months later if we so chose to do so. Next slide, please.
Ashley, the rates over time, can you just confirm those are monthly rates?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. So a little bit more history around parking, because I've heard a lot of different stories since I've been here. So I really just went and dug to try and understand what is the authority of parking. So our BOCC does have the direct oversight of parking, and this is no different than any other county-owned facility. Parking is a facility. As I mentioned earlier, I oversee the department that is assigned to managing and controlling campus parking, and I also have been provided oversight of the budget allocated to campus parking. At the county, we have one full-time parking coordinator, and then I have two part-time parking enforcement officers. They patrol 8 to 5 Monday through Friday. I did hire our second one that also has availability where she will stay late sometimes, like if we have events or if we have special weekend events. We're looking at how do we potentially utilize our enforcement officers for that. So things like a Hood Fest or a Bloomsday or the Wednesday farmers market, right? There are times when we do have parking that occurs in our lots that in the past we have not enforced, but that could help us generate more revenue. We also, which I don't have on this slide, but last year got our kiosks installed. We are testing our employee parking
first with our new online parking system, which has a license plate reader on the vehicle. And so we wanted to work the bugs out with our employee parking first before we started impacting our community members. We are almost finished with the employee parking, and then we'll be ready to flip those actual kiosks on, which will help us eliminate the parking meters, and then will allow us to probably see more revenue generated through those kiosks. The other thing that comes with that, though, is county code changes. Some of our county code language, it looks like, hasn't been changed as far back as 1945, which is fascinating. So our parking coordinator has been working on that diligently. She just sent me what she believes is her final draft that I'll be getting over to our prosecuting attorney for the civil group, who I'm going to have review it as well to make sure we didn't miss anything. Once we get that updated, we'll be able to update language, things like parking meter to I forget what she used, some sort of enforcement. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head, but basically making sure that we aren't locked into current language that will allow us to use the technologies that we've purchased through the kiosks and things like that. So we should hopefully have that wrapped up here in about the next month, which then we would need to do is it would change county code. We go through that process of the public hearing and all of that good stuff, but that is something that our parking coordinator has been working on. A little bit more history from resolutions I could find back through 1999 until July of 2023. There had been a parking committee, and that had been comprised of employees, both union and non-union, and outside entities such as SPD and then the Spokane Regional Health District, and those have all been voting members. So we've had voting members of the parking committee. Just to restate that, union, non-union, and outside entities have had voting rights on that committee. That agreement did expire in July of 2023, so as of now, the parking committee is no longer recognized by that agreement. So as we look forward, next slide, please. Really looking at how are we going to get the work done, a little bit more information around the parking committee and the parking agreement. So it did expire on the 24th of this year. Just for your awareness, 10 of the last 18 meetings were canceled. They decided to move the meeting from a monthly meeting to a quarterly meeting in 2022 in an effort to start getting quorums in attendance. That still didn't work. 3 of our last meetings actually had a quorum. Even the last meeting when there was kind of a reinvigorated effort from one of our amazing employees who, so Leanne, who you guys heard from CTR, she was kind of gifted this committee when her predecessor retired, and I give that woman credit. She has tried her best to get people interested, engaged, to show up. She thought she had a whole new group that was ready to come, and at the last meeting, they still didn't have a quorum. And so they weren't able to actually approve the last minutes. They tried to approve it under what they wanted the new quorum to be, but technically that doesn't work. So those meetings are still not approved from months back. So I wanted you guys to have an idea of the difficulty that we've had getting a quorum, getting interest. Since I've been here, January of 2021, there has been no action, no work, and no decision that has occurred out of that parking committee. So Julie Korsten, who is our parking coordinator in the HR office, is the person who has driven everything that has occurred related to parking for the last almost 3 years. She is doing a remarkable job, and if we continue to move forward looking for a committee, this next slide kind of proposes what we might, 2 slides from now, what we might look at. So next slide, please, Rebecca. As I look at what do we need in the future, and how are we going to do this, I had already mentioned it, but the county code needs to be updated to reflect our new language processes and technology. That's already moving forward. We are, going to need to look at updating our rates to ensure that we're not subsidizing our parking by the general fund moving forward, unless you guys decide that that's something that you want to do, and if so, then we can kind of leave things status quo. But right now, anything that's parking related is essentially being funded by the general fund to a certain level, which means that we don't have an adequate fund balance built right now. And I know, again, just kind of history, At one point, there had been a goal of having a bit of a fund balance established, so in the event that we had something massive happen or we wanted to build another facility, that there would be funds available. We have nothing right now of that sort set aside. So if, for example, we had, knock on wood, you know, a sinkhole open in one of our lots and we had to pay to have that restored, finished, all of that would have to be funded by the general fund right now. We do not have any contingency dollars sitting in a fund. So in my opinion, I think a future need is to really start looking at adequate rates to start slowly, right, not overnight, but slowly rebuilding a fund that enables us to plan for and be prepared for capital parking needs in the future and or emergency events. Another thing that we are working on and needs to occur is a full analysis of our actual parking practices to understand, is there a better way that we can offer spaces to more people? I totally get that we have had for the existence of time seniority wins, right? If you're a senior employee, you get parking and that's it. With the shift of a lot of our staff moving to flex work scheduling, I've had a lot of questions around, you know, I see lots that are half empty every day, right? Why are we not utilizing those spaces? Well, under our current parking practices, if I have a parking space that I pay for $25 monthly, whether I show up or not, that space sits vacant, right? And so, you know, the part of that analysis needs to be looking at how do we maybe look at our lot capacities. What is our percentage of parking? What could our oversell rate be? Recognizing that there are days, usually Mondays and Fridays especially, that we have far more vacant lot space, right? And so I'd like to do that analysis. Our new system AIMS that has the lot scanners will actually allow us to do that electronically. In the past and in current state, that's a hand count daily by our enforcement officers that would have to do that. And so our new technology will allow us to actually gather that data through the license plate scanners and through our lot capacity. So I would like to collect a solid 6 months of parking before I feel like I have a really solid understanding of what that could look like. But I do think there's some small tweaks we could already do for some of that oversell on a Monday, Friday that our new system will enable us to look at. And that speaks to what our lot capacity is. And so really looking at in the future, you know, what is that lot capacity, but also what additional lots maybe you're gonna need to fold into this in the future. So I've been working with Parks and Rec, with Doug, as they're looking at Liberty Lake, and they've been talking about, do they look at charging for parking when they renovate and they open their new facility? For example, they've used kind of a fee for use model in the past where they had someone staffed in that gate that you pay to come in and use the park. Do we look at that from a parking perspective and a kiosk perspective instead, and what might that look like? So that's an additional future work that we're looking at as we're looking at, you know, Bear Lake in the future, or if we do anything with fairgrounds. Those are the things that we're looking at from a parking perspective for future revenue sources as well. So on the next slide, you know, just looking at how can that work be completed. You know, I think no need for decisions today unless you guys want to point and direct me. But kind of two options that I've been playing with in my head. One is keeping the current staffing level, regardless of what decision we go with. I'd like to keep the current staffing in the HR department and continue to move forward with what we've been working on. You know, I think the team is good. They feel like they're a part of the team, like they have support. And so I'd recommend leaving parking with HR. But I think there's two options that we need to look at as far as the committee in the future, since it has expired. So the first option would be if the board determines they would like to continue to see a committee related to parking, I'm asking that we restructure and we reorg that committee in an effort to get a true working committee out of it. I would love for, you know, if we're gonna have a committee, it would be a committee that's there to help us to actually get things done. For things like information gathering, policy update, rate recommendations, that's all being done by one person right now, and she's doing amazing with it. But if we do continue to have a committee, I would hope that that's the direction we can go with a committee, that they're actually involved in that.
Isn't the committee structure or nature defined by our bargaining agreements?
Nope. So our bargaining agreements are not tied to parking. In fact, through the nature of the fact that we have bargaining members, non-bargaining members, and outside entities. It's not a negotiations committee. We don't negotiate with them. It's not part of contracts. And it's not a benefit, right? Parking is a facility. I think that's part of the thought that was out there, was we had been negotiating these. No, it's not a negotiation. It's not bargaining. And even Gordon Smith, when he was still with council too, we had that conversation when some of the people were frustrated about the SPD parking, right? And they wanted to file a grievance against the county for allowing this parking, and he told them, this isn't negotiations, this isn't contractual, there's nothing to file.
Okay, thank you.
So if we do keep the committee, I would recommend that we look at up to 11 committee members, so it's more manageable, and completely stripping out bargaining, non-bargaining. It's just who's interested and who wants to be here, and no more than one per department on the county campus. When we go out and start looking at other option, like other lots, that would be when I would say we'd fold in a parks person or things like that. But really just looking at, if we do keep a committee, my ask would be, how do we get a committee that wants to be a productive partner to the parking department and help us make things happen, right? Help us ensure that we're getting back in a direction where we have a healthy fund balance, that our employees are still being provided fair parking rates, but that we are doing it in a way that we are also ensuring that we are setting ourselves up for future success. The other option would be to just not reinstate a committee. I'm comfortable with that as well. And that would be, I mean, the work's already been being done by our HR department and by Julie. It has been for 3 years. We could continue to move forward in that direction. I am happy to have it go that way, but obviously this is, not my decision. It's up to this group. But I wanted to at least present the two options. And if we did keep a committee, I guess just my personal ask, since it's my team that's engaging with that and doing that work. That's what I have for you today.
Because on your grid with the rates over time, what is that public agency? Who's parking in those spots?
It's our employees, right?
It could be, so public agency could be like municipal court, the city of Spokane.
Okay, so they're non-county employees that are using those spots.
Yeah, but they're still agencies that we work with, SPD.
Okay.
Yeah, just different agencies that we allow parking for.
Okay.
And we manage that parking as well, just for, so we get their seniority list. All of that is also managed through our parking department.
So what are those by contract? Like you mentioned with the SPD ones, their price is locked in to a contract that we have, an agreement with them. Do we have the same agreement, say with SRHD and with the public agencies as well? Or are those,
I can't find
do we just
agreements.
raise the rates to what we think would be an acceptable price?
Yeah, I can't find agreements. I'm still digging on those ones. It looks like in past resolutions, they just named, and it hasn't happened very often, right? But when they made the change, they just made the change with the resolution, it looks like, in the parking agreement. That said, I'm still digging to see if I'm missing something somewhere. It hasn't been as easy to throw in search terms into the resolution directory as I'd hoped it was going to be. The one contract I know for certain is the SPT contract, but I haven't found others at this point.
Okay, thank you.
So the major expenses are the full-time coordinator and the 2 part-time enforcement officers?
Those are a small part of our expenses.
So what makes up the expenses, and why do you think it went up by like 50,000 in 2022?
So snowplow makes up a whole list. There's all sorts of.
Yeah, it would be helpful just to break out the expenses.
Within, I wanna say the last year or two, we restriped all the lots too, and I assume that.
So there was some
2022 was a major effort to do pothole filling, resurfacing, and restriping. So there was, I wanna say we spent over $100,000 on that alone. And again, to Ashley's point, there's been no planning for creating a fund balance when you have those every 2-5-year maintenance things that are just part of having surface parking lots.
Right.
The other stuff that goes into this that you wouldn't think of, like electricity, right? So every time we get a rate increase from Vista or electricity cost increase, we haven't reviewed any of those. repair and maintenance, like our parking vehicle, I'm asking for a new one. But we get 6 miles to the gallon, and this year alone, we have replaced the starter, the tires, the fuel pump, and a bunch of other things I don't even know the terms, and it still makes a fun noise when it goes uphill, right? So those are expenses that hit this. Snow plowing was pretty significant at the end of last year. If we remember how much snow we had at the end of last year, that expense. And then gravel actually is really expensive. I didn't even recognize how much it cost to gravel lots. So, you know, those are those things that as we really start digging in, you know, some years we might be able to save a little money because we don't have a heavy snow. But even as you look at the cost of gravel, as at the cost of contracts for plowing, things like that, we've not recognized any sort of planning for increase of those costs. And then to Scott's points, we did a lot of potholes. Actually, that was one of our biggest things that we tackled last year. And these numbers don't include the wages or the cost that facilities spends, because a lot of our employees, our facilities group is the one that's actually doing the labor when we are repairing, restriping, things like that. So I did not even put in an estimated percentage. I didn't think that was fair to just shoot a random number out, but I just think it's important to note these numbers don't even reflect what it costs facilities to do that work for us.
Some of the other things that we haven't really fully leveraged is after hours or weekend parking. We don't have, we didn't have the system to be able to enable that. We didn't have the enforcement to be able to recognize that, but we're missing out on revenue opportunities for, and I know folks use it and would use it and would pay, even if it's a minor amount, they pay for it for after hours stuff, so.
And once we get the code changed, so the code will reflect that, because the code doesn't have that in it right now. The code actually locks rates directly into code rather than referencing a rate sheet. So we don't even have the ability right now to charge for weekend or after hours. And so that's part of why we need to get code amended before we flip on the public parking side of it, so that our code allows for us to charge for things like that. The other thing that's been fascinating as I've really been digging in is we've also seen other groups on weekends or at night that have even printed their own signs that say free parking for the market, and they're using our lots. So, you know, just things like that as I've really started to dig in, I think we have opportunity to partner with some of the other groups that would like to use our lots, maybe for a minimal fee, you know, but just those have been the things I think we have a lot of opportunity to look at, but it's just systematically biting off one piece of the elephant at a time.
Yeah, I noticed when I went to a pavilion, so now that we have we've always had the arena, we have the pavilion concerts now, and what's the other space on the hill? And
sports complex.
Well, you'll have the sports complex, but anyway, there were people parking all the way, because I had to walk back to my vehicle all the way over here for a pavilion concert. So I definitely think there are opportunities to, to be able to offer these at reasonable rates to folks who want to take advantage of all the opportunities in this neck of the woods.
I agree completely. Which will require additional capital though to install more kiosks, right? So we were very minimal on how many kiosks we installed in lots, that were really more focused on kind of the closed spaces that our employees utilize, that we knew had meters in. So that's the other thing, as I planned for additional kiosks and additional lots. Right now I don't have that funding, and so how do I get to a point where I can, even if it's a break even for a little bit, right? But that way we can pay to put the electricity in that needs to go there, run the internet that needs to run there, and then the kiosk itself.
So I know as a commissioner, I mean, it's like our lot on the weekends and stuff, I mean, we'll come in or not, we'll use it for events and activities. So, I mean, I guess are you thinking you're gonna be metering the lot here on the weekend, or, because those are kind of 24/7 supposed to be.
I was thinking about these out
more,
here.
yeah, so not, like, the ones that have kind of more public space, some of our larger lots that we could use, I don't have a plan yet, to be totally honest, but as I look at that's that work that needs to be done as we start getting our lot counts and things like that, as well as really having a full understanding of what are the lot counts, how often are they being used, and then what ones would make sense to utilize. To Commissioner Walter's point, I'm thinking more like the lots on or maybe the south side of Broadway, where it's closer to the market, it's closer to Kendall Yards, and it's probably a place where people really are parking, where, you know, the Bruncheonette gets a ton of weekend traffic, right? How do we look at those spaces first, in my thoughts, on the south side of Broadway?
Just trying to think. How do we look to move forward but still be cognizant of employees that have parking? I guess I would definitely like to see if the SPD, you know, if some of these groups are not part of the revenue that's coming in, that would be the first thing. I mean, I think the commissioners, just like we don't have a capital improvement fund for anything, so I mean, that's why we've never had one. Parking. It's always been just kind of as we have the funding, and I think one of the other costs was getting that electronic system.
Yeah, so there actually had been a fund balance, story is it was significant at one point that got moved, a chunk of it, to go cover some other things. But there was still a bit of a fund balance left back in 2020, and that's kind of the last decision that I can find that was made by that committee, was to say, yes, we should use our fund balance to pay for the electronic. And so that pretty much brought fund balance down to zero, and that's the last time that we really had a healthy savings account, so to speak, for things like this.
Yeah, I just would want to make sure that we're capturing, if we're going to start charging more, that we're at least capturing all the other revenue source that is specifically the parking. So if there's agencies that are doing that I don't know, but you know, that's coming into the parking committee specifically. And SPD, I don't know where that money's going, but it, you know, definitely should be coming over to the parking committee.
To the parking department, and we do, like Spokane Regional Health District, that directly comes in as a revenue, right? So and we bill out departments and things like that. So the one, and I did reach out to the budget office to see, is there any sort of journal entry that's occurring for SPD? Because that's the one that I can't see, and no, it's just the general.
And for the health district, so we actually own the parking lot, is that, so when we transferred the building, we didn't transfer the parking?
No, we still own it, control it, and are responsible for maintenance.
My recommendation would be to, I think there's value in having a committee of employees who are willing and want to be part of this. I think it's a good learning for them as they look at a business. It's a parking business, and what kind of decisions have to be made, and how do we make sure we have enough revenues to cover expenses? How do we plan for future years? It gives some broader awareness to our employees who want to be part of this, so that they can talk to their colleagues and others that give them some additional insights. So I would recommend we we reconstitute it like Ashley's suggesting, but we keep a group and really kind of reset here's what the roles, here's what the expectations of the committee is. It's an advisory group. They're looking at the operations of parking. They're helping to kind of inform on how might we do a hybrid approach where someone works 2 days a week, 1 week in the office, 3 days at home, and vice versa the next week. How do we more maximize and utilize those things? What are some different ways we can think about after hours use of certain parking lots? So I would recommend we go forward with that. It's a reconstitution from what it looks like today, but it still keeps some of the tenets of the now expired parking committee agreement. It really just looks for people who want to be part of this and used as another learning and career development, if you will.
No, I think having, you know, an advisory committee, I've been an employee, and parking's a huge issue that I guess, you know, it's still, you know, having them as an advisory, so that way, you know, we understand, and it's not just department heads. I would want it to be department heads, you know, people that are actually, you know, talking to their employees and all of that. You and taking that under advisement, because I keep coming back to the commissioners if we're gonna raise rates or how we're gonna look at that. And again, just even on the capital facilities, it's a capital facility that's under the commissioners. That I wanna make sure that it's coming back to the commissioners to be decision-making. That it wasn't the committee or HR department making those decisions.
I view it no different than my HR budget or risk budget, right? I mean, we have these same conversations. If there's a capital ask, it goes through the budget process every year. If there's any sort of need, it goes through the process. It's how this has been operating for as long as I've been here, and I would like to continue to do so in the future from how we operate it. So it's a facility that the commissioners oversee. To that end, if we do continue to have it, it sounds like that's an interest, a committee I would like to, and I can put together kind of the updated resolution, but throw it out to all of our employees, similar to what we've done for other committees, like our investment advisory committee for our 457 plan. So if people are interested, there's an application they could fill out, quick and easy, right? But that way we could make sure that all of our staff have an opportunity. If they would like to throw their hat in the ring, they can throw their hat in the ring. We'll see how many we get. If we get 11, honestly, I'll be shocked, knowing that we've had between 3 and 5 show up lately. But if we open it up to additional people, maybe we do get more interest. But that would be the way that I'd like to go with this, to build that committee, is really to offer it out to our employees, non-department, non-elected head, right? And then that was my thought of no more than 1 per department on campus, so that we don't end up with a whole department either that is showing up for all of the discussion, and then we're missing other buildings or opportunities or areas. Okay, then I will put that together. And then probably in the next couple of weeks, we'll get it out for consent for approval. So I can do another update before, if you guys would like, on that, or if I just get it on a consent. Which you would like.
So, having been through this process before, I can tell you that we have employees that value their parking space more than they do their kids or husband or wife. And so, the minute that they think that you're going to be touching the parking space, that will become the beginning of the World War III.
Yeah.
So just kind of a heads up, been there. Yeah.
I agree, and that's for me. I'm a very data-driven person anyways, and so being able to get that data from our utilization and what are we seeing, what are we not, to be able to explain that, because I agree, people value parking more than I've ever seen anywhere. And so any changes that occur, I want to make sure we have a very clear reason for why, and that we can very clearly show that not only to you, but to our employees for, look, you are still paying for a spot, but when a lot sits empty 50% of the time, we can oversell by 35%, right? And we still have then a gap where there's availability. So that's the data that we're working on collecting now that we have the license plate scanners and the lot scanner on the actual vehicle itself.
When the riots began, it was Scott's fault.
Yeah, I guess part of the value of having employees on this as well on the committee, so they're informing and part of the discussion. So.
Well, and I think maybe setting expectations and goals at the beginning, because the goal really is to maybe identify if there could be more spots available to more employees now that we are in a new world of, flex working. And so the goal is really to find more parking opportunities to level set the costs and the expectations around, being able to maintain the lots, and then also potentially find a new revenue source with after hours, partnerships. So, I think setting those expectations, this is not about taking away your parking spot. The goal is to find more parking, is to make it equitable, and it's to, potentially bring in more revenue as much as possible to offset any, potential increases over time.
Exactly.
Okay. I would say though, I'd probably want another briefing rather than just have it go on consent, just so we're really aware of what the resolution's gonna say.
Perfect. All right. Thank you.
We're gonna get asked. Scott.
Well, I know we have one really timely exec session that Chris will talk about. Commissioner French has one, and I think there's one additional one that Commissioner Cuny has asked me to add too. So, you want to start with yours?
Sure. I have a exec session pursuant to RCW 4230-110-1I for a pending litigation matter. Should be the board, Scott Simmons, myself, Patrick Bell, Mike Sparber, and probably Jeff Morris as well on that one. And I'm hoping that one will take about 15 minutes.
Mine's pending a potential litigation and probably be able to deal with it in 10 minutes.
I mean, 10 seconds. Okay, and then I've got one under pending potential RCW 4230-110-1I. And that one will be in addition to Commissioners Chris Anderson, myself, Kat Nichols, Ashley Cameron, and Randy Bishop, and Pat Bell.
Okay, so we expect to be in executive session for 30 minutes total?
That's right.
I took that stuff. Oh, I was gonna say 5.
5 minutes, yep.
Just maybe more. Okay, 30 minutes, because I'm sure people probably have other things they're supposed to be doing, as I know I was. So we'll be going to executive session for the 3 items just stated, with the people that were just stated for 30 minutes. At the end of the 30 minutes, we will be adjourning. There's no action to be taken on any of those. No action. And so it is 12:03. So I'll say we will go into executive session at 12:05 and we'll be until 12:35. And we will be adjourning for the day and ending our special meeting. And we'll see everyone tomorrow at 9 o'clock. Thank you.